Okay, great. Let's see here. I think, hopefully that will be better. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, pardon me for that. There was a little bit of an issue with the live stream, but hopefully that's all solved there. Oop, there we go. Yep. And there we go. Okay, sorry about that. I had a little bit of an issue there, but now we are up and running. So I apologize for that delay, but hopefully things are okay, and we can get started. So before I begin, hopefully the sound is okay and the image is okay, coming through okay, and we can get going. We're a little bit behind schedule by a minute or so, so I apologize, but I hope you can understand. And we'll just wait maybe a minute or so, and then we'll get started. But if you can let me know if the noise is okay. Okay, great. Wolfgratz, thank you very much, my friend. Thank you. Great. And I apologize for anyone who is at the live stream. I first set it up, and then for whatever reason I wasn't getting clear signals or something, so I just turned it off and started it again. So okay, we'll give it another minute or so. So just you can sit back and relax, and we'll get going very soon. In the meantime, I hope everyone is doing well, and the live stream topic for today is Sergio Leone's film Once Upon a Time in the West. And I'll talk about this later, but I know that there are many versions out there, and even on current Blu-rays and DVDs and VHS, there might be some slight irregularities from version to version to version. So I didn't specify which version to watch because I don't know what's available where you are, but I'll try to talk about this a little bit during the live stream today. Excuse me. And we'll go from there. So you don't have to worry about which version you watched or didn't watch, but I'll try to explain what my understanding is of the various versions, and we'll go from there, including this particular US Blu-ray. There's a particular issue with respect to this US Blu-ray that I have in front of me, and so I'll try to address that today. I would say that the issues of the versions, for the most part, aren't really that integral to what I'm going to say today, but they do provide some interesting insight into the characterizations and some little details that emerge on the screen, but maybe aren't necessarily explained. And there's one particular rather famous or infamous scene that is known to exist in certain cuts, but it's said to not exist in other cuts. But I'll talk about that later. So, okay, so we are getting ready to go. So, okay, my friends, let's begin. Excuse me. Excuse me. That's a great way to start. Let me just have a nice sip of water. Excuse me. And that's a moment where if that happened on a video, I would usually cut it out. But this is live, so. It's included. Excuse me. I apologize. Okay. All right. So let's begin, shall we? So, greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and we are live. Today is April 18th, 2020, where I am. Saturday evening. It's a little bit after 11 p.m. where I am here in Tokyo, and I apologize for starting a little bit late. There are some minor technical difficulties, but I think we have overcome those. And so we are now here to talk about this very epic film from Sergio Leone from 1968. This is Once Upon a Time in the West, This is the great, great Western film. And this is the great Western film starring Charles Bronson, Henry Fonda, Claudia Cardinale, and Jason Robards and others. And this is a kind of ultimate Western for many people, for many reasons, and I'll try to get into the reasons why I think that's so. But is as a pure entertainment, it's quite grand and epic and magnificent. And there are many aspects to this film that I really cherish and admire, and I admire it even so now, after having seen it for a number of times, ever since I was a little kid, and ever since then I've been changed. I can honestly say that this film changed my perspective on cinema when I first saw it as a little kid, and there were some pretty big surprises that I experienced in watching this film for the first time, and I'll try to share those experiences with you today, and hopefully that might lead into just some discussion about what I think about particular aspects of this film, and of course I think more importantly what you think about this film. And so this is a live stream and the live chat is going on. So my friends, just a few preliminary points before we get started. So the live stream is here, and you have the live chat here about this film, Once Upon a Time in the West. So first things first, this film is, we're going to talk about this film, and we're going to talk about details of the plot. And so if you have not seen the film, I would strongly suggest that you turn off this live stream right now. I really mean that. If you have not seen this film, please turn off this live stream. Don't watch this live stream. I do not want to spoil this film for you. It's from 1968, and so chances are this film is already well known in many film fan circles. And if that's the case, then so be it. That's the nature of a grand masterpiece like Once Upon a Time in the West. But I really, really encourage you to, if you're interested in a great entertainment Western, to seek this out and watch it without knowing any details about it. Without hearing what the plot is, without reading about the synopsis or anything like that. Do not read anything about this film before watching it if you have not seen it yet. And I really, really strongly suggest that. And so with that in mind, this live stream will be going into strict details of this. So if you have not seen this film, turn off this live stream right now. And it's okay. I don't mind it in the slightest. It's more important for me that you watch the film rather than me spoiling the film for you for the sake of the live stream. The live stream will be up on the channel after it's over, so you can always come back to this as a video and watch it after you've seen the film. But I strongly, strongly urge you to watch the film first, and don't read anything about it. Try not to ask people about it, because lest people inadvertently or accidentally just mention certain things about it. The more that you don't know about this film going into it, the better off you will be. I promise you that. And so this live stream will be talking about this film in some detail. The next thing is, as with all these live streams, I have to preface my comments by saying that I am coming at this not as any direct participant of the production. I haven't studied this film. I haven't given this film much attention in terms of academic study. My only experience with this film is as a fan and as someone who has seen it a number of times, as I say, since I was very little. And I'll talk also about the specific version that I've seen, because that's also very significant when in the context of this film, because as some of you may know also, this film has a very complex release history, and it's quite complex, and it's actually much more complex than I can really give it justice. So, in other words, I can only give comments that are based on my own just general exposure to this film, but only to certain versions of this film. And my understandings of the film, or my understandings of other versions of the films, are really going to be very, very limited. And so I will try to be as as clear as possible. And so I don't claim to be any expert. I don't claim to have any direct knowledge, any hidden extra knowledge that is in any way more knowledgeable than, let's say, anyone else out there. So I'm coming at this as a pure fan. But I do also want to share again some comments and questions and feelings and reactions that I have to this. And more importantly for me, I do want to hear your thoughts about this film. And so that brings me to my next point, which is that the live chat is open. And so I have to say that, it's always been nice to hear people's thoughts about films in these live streams, and it's wonderful. And so let's keep this up. I just ask for just a few favors from you, as always. So it's always good to agree. It's always good to disagree in the live chat. But even when we disagree, my friends, let's always share our opinions in a respectful way. There's no need to be overly antagonistic. Again, if there's disagreement, but there's a way to express disagreement and still respect the opinions of others. I know everyone here feels that way, and everyone has shown such great respect to me and to everyone. And I'm always I'm just always happy to know that feeling of or that approach and mutual respect for everyone here will continue on. So let's make sure that is the case during the live chat. So there's that. And the second thing is you can ask me any questions that you want, and I'm perfectly happy to answer them to the best of my ability. But as always with everything, there are things, of course, that I don't know, and so there might be some questions that I'm unable to answer. So I ask for your patience and your understanding in advance. Also, I must say that if you have any questions for me in the live chat about any other film other than Once Upon a Time in the West, thank you very much for bringing it up. I'm very honored that you would want to ask me. I just have to say that I will be focusing my energies and efforts today on this film, Once Upon a Time in the West. And so I won't necessarily be answering or necessarily talking about any other film. I might bring up something maybe in passing or something, I don't know, but even a discussion, I won't have any deep discussion of any other film because I just want to focus my attention on this film, Once Upon a Time in the West. You're welcome to have discussions in the live chat about other films if you like, and I'm perfectly happy that you'd be willing to do so. But anything for me, I will just be focusing on Once Upon a Time in the West. If you have any other questions, you can always leave them as a comment after the fact, or you can go to another video and leave a comment there, and I do my best to answer as I always do. So just a few rules about that, not rules, but a few little just preliminary things before we get started. I think that's about it. That's the usual stuff that I say before every live stream. Well, in that case, let us begin in earnest with Once Upon a Time in the... Oh yes, I'm sorry. There's one other thing. I will try to address all the people here in the live chat, and so if you are here, hello, it's nice to see you. And if you're here for the first time, hello, it's nice to see you. It's nice to meet you. My name is Daisuke. And so please, if you are here and you want to say hello, or you want to say something about this film, please feel free to let me know, and I'd be very happy to hear what it is you have to say. And if I happen to miss your comment, if I happen to not mention you if you're in the chat, and you feel that I ignored you or something, please, I didn't mean to. It's not my intention to do so. It's just that maybe I missed the comment, or maybe the comment is not necessarily about Once Upon a Time in the West or something like that. But really, there's no ill will meant on my part. It's just simply that I'm just here by myself looking at the computer screen here, and I'm trying to keep up as best as I can. But I am only human, and so I might miss one, two, or many comments, and I ask for your understanding and my apologies in advance if that indeed happens. But I will try to avoid that, but things like this happen. So with that in mind, my friends, let us begin with Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968 Sergio Leone film. And I think I should begin by just prefacing that as I say, I've seen this film a number of times, And I first saw it on TV in the U.S. when I was living in the U.S. as a kid, and I might have mentioned this before, but I was kind of young. I wasn't in college yet, and this was during the time when my family, when I was a kid, my mother and father and I, we were in the United States, in the eastern part of the United States, and this film came up on TV. And I'm the details are a little bit shady as far as exactly when it was, but it was a very interesting film in that it was shown on TV, and it was the cropped version, if I recall correctly. So it wasn't the full widescreen presentation, but it was cropped, and so. But it was still on TV. It was still a pretty good presentation, so I didn't really mind it. I had never heard of the film until sometime prior to when I found out it was going to play on TV. I'd watched films like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and A Fistful of Dollars, and For a Few Dollars More, in particular because my father, at the time, he was a huge Westerns fan. He loved Westerns, and any Western he could get his hands on, at the local library or the VHS rental store, he would just rent it and watch it all the time. And he would always, I just remember occasionally I'd have memories of him occasionally just in the house. This was when I was a kid. In the house, and you'd just be singing the theme song to Gunfight at the OK Corral or something, and he'd just be talking and just say Shane, Shane, just be mumbling all these lines and songs and little references from Westerns that he just loved. And one of the films that he loved was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and so that was always something that I seem to recall that he would always mention The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Oh, that's a great film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And then I managed to see it when I was a kid, and it was a long film for me, and I didn't really get everything that was going on, but I felt something special about it. And then this was around the time when I was beginning to become aware of filmmakers and getting a sense of what there was in terms of making films. And so this was around that age, and it just so happened that I found out that this film with the long title of Once Upon a Time in the West was going to be playing on TV. And so I decided, this is something I should watch. I didn't know anything about it. I went in, I watched the broadcast on TV, and there was a VHS player that we had, so I decided to record it. It was on EP mode, just to make sure I could get all of the film, because it was I now understand it. It was what I understand to be the extended version of the US cut of the film, which then became in wider circulation. So as you know, as some of you may know, this film was released in the United States, and then around the time of its initial release, it was cut to from its length of about 166 minutes down to about 145 minutes. And then around the early 1980s, my understanding is that it was that US version was then recut to a longer version that purported to be very, very close to the what's known as the European version, but I think that's a little bit of a misnomer too. But in other words, it was purported to be closer to the 160. It's about 165 minute cut, and that became what was prevalent. And now that I think back on it, that was the version that I think was playing on TV, and because there were certain scenes that, based on my own information and my own research, there were scenes that I saw on that TV version that were included in there. Then I read that weren't in the original, or not original, but in the cut version, the pared down 145 minute version. So I understood that to be the sort of the beefed up version. Let me put it that way. And I was just totally not ready for what I was going to watch. As I said, I was a little kid and quite impressionable at that time. And then it just played on TV, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And there was one moment in particular that to this day I was just so caught off guard by, and it was the introduction of Frank. And I'll talk more about that in detail. But I think from that moment, there were so many great moments. The Ennio Morricone score really got to me. The way the camera moved really got to me. The real, almost ethereal, almost ghost-like existence and presence of the harmonica character, the Charles Bronson character, as he just glides in from off screen to on screen, just from usually from right to left. So there's one or a couple instances where he goes the opposite direction, but he just glides in on in the screen like a ghost or something. And then there's the great affable nature of Cheyenne, and the story that kind of made sense to me, but at the time as a little kid didn't quite make sense to me at the same time. But it didn't really matter because it was all about them, for me anyway, the mood and the atmosphere and the swelling type of machismo that was in the air. And then I realized that there was so much more to the film in terms of depictions of male-female relationships, the way in which this is like an archetypical type of story, the way in which certain people are stand-ins for bigger themes, the creation of the American myth, the destruction of the American myth, the establishment of what becomes icons of American society, the way in which the West and quote-unquote lawlessness collides with the modern sense of capitalism. And what is more lawless, the lawless nature of the Old West, or the modern nature of the capitalist drive as personified with ice-cold precision and almost scary prescience by Morton and his railway tycoon obsession and what he is able to do with money. And it's actually much more dangerous and in many ways much more lawless than the quote-unquote lawless nature of the Old West. But these are things that emerged later as I watched the film more and more. But it created quite an impact for me when I was a kid. And I'll say right now, just as an introduction, that the introduction of Frank and the Henry Fonda character and the way he is introduced was perhaps one of, if not the most startling thing I'd ever seen. And to this day, I'm so happy that I was able to watch the film and not know that whole thing about Frank and Henry Fonda being a bad guy. You know, there's a pretty famous bit in an interview that Henry Fonda did much later, I think for Parkinson, and the clip is actually in one of the supplements on this particular Blu-ray, where he's talking about how he was cast and why it was that Sergio wanted to cast him. And I fell for it. I absolutely fell for it, and I was stunned. I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't believe what was going on, because I'd known Henry Fonda and known Henry Fonda, his reputation, of course, not him personally, but I'd known of his other films, or some of his other films, and he was this almost angelic, good guy persona, and it was all dashed before my very eyes in seconds. And my worldview seemed to change, my cinema view seemed to change, and so. But I'll talk more about that a little bit later. But let me just say that was perhaps, yes, I still think back on my film journey, and that was perhaps one of, if not the most surprising, startling things I'd ever seen. And as I say, that's the reason why I don't talk about Once Upon a Time in the West. Whenever people make comments about this film to me, I always try to be as vague as possible. And the reason is because if anyone is reading the comments and hasn't seen the film, the last thing I want to do is spoil that particular moment. There are many other moments I don't want to spoil, but that is the moment that I think is so worth cherishing. And even now to this day, whenever I see that the film and I see that scene, I just get chills. I absolutely get chills. But and then let me just finish this introductory comment, and then I'll go into specifics later. But and then I grew up, and I began to watch other films, and I began to understand more about Sergio Leone and his importance and his significance, not only on the Italian Western stage, not only in the Italian cinema front, but also in the cinema stage at large. And his stature was undeniable. And I think his stature comes perhaps, arguably, primarily from this film, Once Upon a Time in the West. Had he made this one film, Once Upon a Time in the West, he would still be a legend. He is a legend, of course, because he's made this film and many other legendary films, as we all know. But this is the big one. And I admit that I'm a little bit nervous talking about this film today, because I'm very ill-equipped when it comes to great masterpieces. But I will certainly do my best. And it won't be a complete conversation about this film, that's for sure. So everything I plan to say today does not intend, or I'm not planning on it being an overall comprehensive discussion of this film. But these are some things that I've always wondered about in watching this film for over the years. And so maybe you can help me with any questions that I have, or and any other mysteries or confusions that I have about this film even now. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts along the way, because that's the most important thing for me. But in any event, my friends, let me just go to the chat here, and then we can go from there. And it's already up and running. My goodness, you guys are great. Tomahawk238 is here. Hello. Wolfgratz, I already said hello. Thank you. Marvel Fan 45. Hello. Marvel Fan 45. Best of luck to you and your YouTube pursuits. I'm gonna watch with great anticipation and excitement. Jared, our dear friend, is here. Gloin the Hobbit. Thank you very much, my friend. Gloin the Hobbit. Thank you also for doing that great thing that you did with the what is your favorite directors video. You made a list of all the you counted up all the directors that were cited, and you made a list. That was brilliant, my friend, so thank you so much. Master 25 is here. Such a great movie, you say. I agree with you, Master 25. Rob Tapscott is here. Hello. Let's see. RCG Blade. Hello, Daisuke. What is your favorite Once Upon a Time film? I'm not sure. I haven't really, to be perfectly honest, I haven't really thought of it. That's such a hard question. This is one of the candidates, that's for sure. Let's see. Emraz here. Hello. It's nice to see you. I hope you're here. Don Pride. I was just talking with you about the Laserdiscs, I think. So it's nice to hear. Elliot is here, our dear friend. Hello. It's nice to see you. Alan. Thank you. Thank you to see. It's nice to see you. Tim is here as well. Kubrick Glover, 1972. Thank you. Oh, it was great. Oh, I have to thank Kubrick Glover for your great video. Thank you very much about the film club live stream last week. So thank you, and you had great comments last week as well. Thank you so much. Crapping Cat says it's insane that it hasn't gotten a more deluxe Blu-ray edition. Okay, Crapping Cat, thank you so much. I got that right? Crapping Cat. So thank you very much, Crapping Cat, for that comment about it hasn't gotten a deluxe Blu-ray edition. Let's get this out of the way, because this is pretty important. But it's sort of maybe, what's the phrase, the elephant in the room, perhaps? The versions, all the versions. What's up with all the versions, and what's up with the this particular Blu-ray that I have, and why does Crapping Cat say what he says about there should be a more deluxe Blu-ray version? Isn't this enough? And that sort of thing. Okay, and the answer to that is no, this is not enough. This particular Blu-ray that I have, which is the Region A US, this is, let's see, Paramount, and it has special features, which is the commentary track, which is an amalgam of many different people, primarily Christopher Frayling, but also you have some bits with John Milius and Alex Cox and John Carpenter and others, and Sheldon Hall, and also Claudia Cardinale and other people. And then there are the four sort of documentaries: An Opera of Violence, The Wages of Sin, and then Something to Do with Death, and then the fourth, which is it's a Railroad Revolutionizing the West, and then Locations, then the Now, and then there's a photo gallery, which is sort of an automatic playthrough gallery of photos with the soundtrack, the theme of Once Upon a Time in the West. Which is also very important, actually, if you're interested, because, well, actually, I'll get to that in a minute. And then this has something on the back here, which is, I think, very misleading. It says, on the Blu-ray, meticulously restored includes both the restored and theatrical versions. Okay, the theatrical version is cited to be 165 minutes, PG-13. The restored version is cited as being 166 minutes, unrated. And it says also on the back here, let's see here. Yeah, it says on the back here, 1969 color. This film is often cited as being 1968. It's probably cited as being 1969 here because of the, I understand the release, the corresponding to the U.S. release date, but I think that's what it is. But this film is usually cited as being 1968. What was I saying? So yes, so it says here theatrical version and restored version. Theatrical version is 165 minutes. Theatrical version, restored version, 166 minutes. Okay, so first of all, what does this mean by the theatrical version? This is very misleading. My understanding is that this is not corresponding to any version that was released in 1968 to 1969. As I say, the release history of this is very convoluted, very confusing, but in a matter of speaking, this could be purported to be accurate in the sense that my understanding is that there was a very small window of time, for example, at the very start of the release of this film, where I think the film had been released in its 165-minute version in the US in a very short window of time, and then it was pulled and then it was edited together. It was edited down to about 145 minutes, and that became known as the US version upon its initial release, which was a very, it had excised many scenes. And then my understanding is that those scenes that were excised for that US version were then reinserted for a re-release of this film in the early 1980s. And so this theatrical version naming is, on the one hand, therefore accurate, but on the other hand, it's inaccurate, and it's actually not clear what this is referring to. And so that clarity is kind of significantly lacking here, and it's going towards a much broader issue as to what versions were actually released of this film and what are the differences among the versions. We have a version that is purported to be the international cut that was based on just information that we can find online or in scholarly research that was released in a 166 or 165-minute version in Europe. But if you look further, you can actually find details depending on the country. You might find information that says that maybe even a longer version had been released in this country or that country for a certain window of time, maybe a 167-minute, 168-minute version or something like that, depending on the country, depending on the actual window of time, etc. So actually there is a lot more complication here. Even in Italy, my understanding is that there was a release version, or there were a number of cuts that I think I've read that might have existed. And so this is all to say that it's all kind of very complex the more I think about it. And but there is one, and also I should say that I have never been able to collect all of the okay, and I should take a step back. The release history of this film as far as physical media is concerned, that's also very difficult and convoluted, because depending on what version that you have, a VHS version, an early DVD version, a later DVD version, a Blu-ray from this country, that country here, a DVD release from this country, that country, it is very possible that the versions might be different, although I have not been able to verify that. I've heard people say that actually this particular version that's found on this DVD from this time period from this country is the international cut, or the international cut from the late 60s and something like that. But I've never been able to verify that, and so and there has never been any kind of supplement found on any Blu-ray, certainly not on this one that I have, where you have someone sitting down and actually explaining, even if it's in a truncated form, explaining what the basic differences are, what versions were actually released and what the differences are. There's never been anything like that in terms of a release on a Blu-ray. And so I think a deluxe Blu-ray of this is actually very, very needed. And a deluxe Blu-ray would hopefully have what would be purported to be, let's say, the international cut, the shorter U.S. cut, the then extended U.S. cut, and then maybe another restored cut, a restoration, and then another restoration. Maybe I know that there's an Italian cut as well, but even that name, I would actually question whether that's indeed accurate. Maybe there's more than one, I'm not sure, and maybe there are cuts from other countries, etc. So the point is that we need, if you really want a full, complete experience or full, complete release of this film, we really need to wait until someone, some label somewhere gets all the materials together to release every single cut that is commercially available and make it available on one single release. Will that ever happen? I have no idea. I mean, I really don't know. It's probably unlikely, but this is actually very important because, let me give you an example. Now, based off of my information that I've gathered over the years, one of the major differences between, let's say, the versions that we have on this particular Blu-ray, which are purported to be closer to the extended U.S. cuts of the film. The differences between this version and, let's say, the international cut that had been released in the late 1960s. There's actually one difference that I've read about, which I've never been able to verify because I've never seen a version like this, which is, if you remember at the very beginning of the film, when Harmonica, well, he's not named Harmonica yet, but the Charles Bronson character arrives on the train and he's confronted by the three people from Frank's gang, led by, including Jackie Lam and Woody Strode and Al Murlock. And so these are the three. And so, and then they confront him, and then there's a quick draw, and then they're all down, including Charles Bronson, because he's shot by Woody Strode's gun as he's falling down. He's shot, and we see him fall. According to information, the scene of him then opening his eyes and getting up, that actually was not included in the international cut. Again, that's what the story is. Now, I've never seen this a version that had that particular moment excised, and I've heard about this, and I've heard people say that they've seen versions like this, but I've never seen that particular version. And I always wanted to see a version, if that indeed exists, where you have the gunfight at the very beginning, and then they're all down because Charles Bronson character too has been shot, and then it cuts straight to the McBain ranch, or the McBain land, and the shooting of the hunting of the birds, right? Because what that does is it gives a further ethereal quality to the Charles Bronson character, because the next time we see him in the film is when Jill is having her stopover and in the middle of the desert, and And then we see Cheyenne come in, and then we have that wonderful entrance with him, and then he throws the lantern that's hanging on a string, and it goes, and we see it light, swaying back and forth, and light Charles Bronson's face, and he does that wonderful gesture with the harmonica, right? He goes like this, and he plays the harmonica. So that's the next time we see him in the film, at least in this particular cut. And so that kind of entrance and the lack of of seeing him get up, it almost means that he becomes like a ghost, and his presence as someone who's actually, is he a living being, or is he representing all of the victims of Frank or something like that? It becomes much more ambiguous, and I think much more poetic, and so and it's much more of a surprise too, because the possibilities that in fact he is dead at the very start of the film, which is really shocking, but in fact that's not the case, as we know from watching the rest of the film, of course. But to have that particular kind of cut, or to have a film with that particular moment excised, I think would be a very interesting thing indeed. But that's one example. There are other examples where, in fact, there are famous or other scenes that have been known to, that were that are understood to have been shot, but then were removed from the final prints of all the versions of the film. That's my understanding. So, for instance, there's a mentioning of a scene early on where the Charles Bronson character arrives at Flagstone, I think, and he's beaten up by the sheriff, who's played by Keenan Wynn, and some of his men. And there are actually pictures of this particular scene that you can see on the photo gallery of this particular US Blu-ray. And there's a moment in the middle of the photo gallery where it actually says, here are some shots of a scene that was eventually cut out of the film, and it's of the guys beating up Charles Bronson. And that also explains why there are some bits later in the film where you see little cuts or little bruises under Charles Bronson's eyes, and the idea is that he would have been in a fight before that particular scene, and then that would explain why he's got a little bit of bruising on his face. But as far as I can tell, that has never been included in any particular release that has been made commercially available. But does it exist in film? Does it not exist? Again, I'm not sure, and because I've never seen it in actual film. So I've only seen pictures of it, and I've only heard about it. But if a Blu-ray could release a version of a film that actually has a scene like that, that would be just amazing if it existed. I don't know. Another thing that Christopher Frayling mentions is just before, or the scene where it's the auction, and Frank's men have tried to force the auction such that they can get the land at a very cheap price. I think it's $500, right? Which it's the same amount of money, I understand, that Morton gives to Frank's men just before that, as buying them off so they can betray Frank. So that's interesting, $500. But there's that scene where then after the auction is ended in harmonica's favor, right? Because it's not $500, it's $5,000, right? And so then the bar is emptied, and we see Frank entering the saloon, and we see him all dressed up clean in the black, and he's clean shaven. And apparently there was a scene where Frank was getting he was getting his shave or something like that, and that's mentioned by Christopher Frayling. It's not clear to me if that scene actually existed, but then was excised, or maybe it was just part of the script itself. But that's another example of, if such a scene were to exist, that would be great to have as part of a whole complete package, maybe in a special cut assembled specifically for a special deluxe Blu-ray of this or something. I don't know. But the point is that, we haven't gotten a full deluxe treatment of this film on physical media that I think this film deserves. One of these days, hopefully it'll happen. What did Jill and harmonica say at the end there? Someday, right? So as harmonica says, someday. Someday, my friends, we can hope to get a full package of this film. But in the meantime, what I'm relying on today is this particular Blu-ray, which is not bad. It's good for what it is, but it has the 165-minute theatrical version and then the 166-minute restored version. And if you're interested, there are just a few differences. I would say razor thin differences between this 165-minute version and the 166-minute version. Things like the beginning sequence, you see maybe a few more shots of Jack Elam. You see him turning. You see a shot of his fingers tapping on his gun holster, and there are some razor thin extensions of particular scenes. I was mentioning earlier about the when Charles Bronson gets up, you see him picking up, after he's been shot, you see him picking up his bag, and you see an extra frame or so of him stepping forward. That's not in the 165-minute version. Little details like that. So I would say that there really isn't that much of a significant difference between this 165-minute version and the 166-minute version that's found on this particular Blu-ray. But the point is that if this were to be a more deluxe release, we'd see more cuts, and with significant differences between the cuts. And as of now, I haven't seen any release yet that has a comprehensive collection of all the significant cuts and versions of this film. Again, someday, my friends, someday we can hope to find a version like that. But in the meantime, we're going to stick with the 165/166-minute version of the film. Incidentally, before I move on, the commentary track is also very interesting because, as you know, the commentary track that's on this particular release is an amalgam of different people, included in which is the filmmaker, the great filmmaker, Alex Cox. And Alex Cox he's not speaking over the entire film, but he's speaking over certain segments of the film. And one of the film segments that he's talking about is the scene where Frank comes back after his men have attacked him and tried to kill him, and he goes back to Morton's train in the middle of the desert. And he's seen also that the train, all the people, and they're dead. And there has obviously been a gunfight, a gun battle, when we understand it to be a gun battle between Frank's men on the train and then Cheyenne's men who tried to attack him. And then this idea of Alex Cox's commentary saying that there was this particular scene that we're about to see. Some parts were included in the release, other parts were not included. And he mentions that the bits where Frank goes into the train and he sees all the dead people in the train car saloon, those bits were, according to Alex Cox, not in the original theatrical release version. And so it's not clear exactly what he's talking about. My guess is that he's talking about the 145-minute American cut, but then again, he's not clear about that, so I can't be absolutely sure because, as I say, I haven't seen the 145-minute American cut, and so I can't verify that. But my point in bringing that up is that he mentions it, but doesn't really go into much detail about what cut he's talking about. And that's kind of an example of what I'm saying, is that there really needs to be a lot of clarity, and we have to really be careful when we talk about what version we are dealing with and what version we are talking about here. And a deluxe Blu-ray that could happen with this film really needs to do that. It really needs to be as specific as possible, with as much detail as possible regarding what version the particular commentator is talking about, etc., just to give more clarity with this particular issue, because it is a pretty significant issue. It does potentially change the way one looks at this film and the like. And also, I should say as a final point, that it does bring about this idea of how, I think, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Blu-ray. I've always been a big fan of Blu-ray, but this is one of the things about Blu-ray releases that we always have to be careful of, because who is to say that the Blu-ray release is the definitive version of the film? I mean, it could be a great image quality, sound quality. Of course, it's probably going to top any VHS, DVD, Laserdisc release that has occurred before. Of course, okay, that is usually without question. But what about the version? when something like this purports to be the theatrical version, I would question that. And if I look at that, I think to myself, what theatrical version? What theater are you talking about? What country are you talking about? I'd need more information. And so there's a certain importance, I think, of keeping that in mind whenever we are dealing with whatever version that we have in front of us. If we are relying on a VHS tape, what's the length? What's the running time that's set on the back? Is that really the running time that is actually the film that we're watching? Because actually, I've seen instances of that, not necessarily with Once Upon a Time in the West, but I've seen instances where the back of the box will say a certain running time, but I'm watching the film, and in fact, the film that I'm watching doesn't correspond to the same running time. So sometimes the details on the back of the box might not even be correct. And so that my point is that we really have to, it's always good to keep asking questions. What version actually is this? When was this released? And things like that. Where was this released? And I think those details are particularly important, and those questions are particularly important when talking about this film. Again, in the grand scheme of things, I think a discussion about this film really will be relevant, more or less, with whatever version that you're talking about. But if you really want to get into all the specific differences, all the footage that could be available, every little thing that might exist, we really have to always keep asking questions. And that's what I would encourage everyone to do. It's always healthy to keep asking questions about that. And then let's hope that, again, as our dear friend Crapping Cat said, let's hope that this gets, one day, this gets a better, more deluxe Blu-ray release. Again, as Jill and Harmonica say at the end, someday, my friends, someday. Okay, so thank you very much, Crapping Cat, for bringing that to my attention. Wolfrats is here again. Yes, I've said hello. Yes, let's see. Let's see. Okay. Yes, George, Papa Giorgio says we need a Criterion or 4K restoration of this masterpiece. Yes. And Alan Nigrella says, greatest opening sequence of any film ever made, in my opinion. That is very, very rich praise, but I think many people would agree with you, or certainly wouldn't necessarily want to dissuade you. That's for sure. And I think it's incredibly powerful opening in terms of the how Christopher Frayling describes it as being heightened sound, heightened reality. Everything is really turned up. The way that the doors slam, the way that the ticker tape sounds, the way that the knuckles are cracked, the way that water's dripped and hits the brim of the hat, the way that the fly buzzes around Jack Elam's. We understand it was, according to Christopher Frayling, it was pasted with jam or something like that to attract the fly. If that's true, that's a pretty interesting story. But that's another thing about the Christopher Frayling commentary. It's good, and there's some moments of the commentary where I, with all due respect to Christopher Frayling, I would disagree slightly with what he says, but all in all, it's a pretty good commentary. It's a really great one, in fact. The bits we do get of it anyway. But yeah, that is a really great opening. Really, really fantastic. And we see a lot of things at play that we will see further in the film. Of course, we see all the references that are made to all the westerns, even within that first 5 or 10 minutes or so. Things like John Ford and The Searchers, and even Iron Horse, and even films like High Noon, and even we see the appearance of Al Murlock and Jack Elam and Woody Strode, who of course bring with them such a great pedigree, not only from westerns of Hollywood, but also Sergio Leone westerns as well. Even as recent as The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And so there's all this luggage and baggage that is brought even within these first few minutes in these first scenes of the film. And then, of course, the appearance of Charles Bronson. He appears from behind the train like a ghost. And that's an example of how he seems to glide in to scenes. He doesn't seem to just rough himself into a scene. His entrances to a scene are very elegant. He either emerges from behind a moving train. That's the case in this particular opening. We also see that later when he's following Wobbles, and we see Wobbles go to the Morton train, and then Harmonica seen tailing him, and we see Harmonica because the train passes on the line, and after the train leaves we see Harmonica there, and he follows him down. So that's another way that he enters. He also enters, there's a screen, and his face in profile comes usually from the right part of the screen onto the screen like this in profile. Once in a while it would come from the opposite direction, but more or less it always comes from here, this side, into the frame in profile, which is really great. And it's capped off by a great way that he does. I mean, his profile always goes from right to left for the most part. It does that in quite memorably in the final duel that he has with Frank at the end, and also when he leaves the house and says someday he leaves like this, and so he leaves just like he enters, which is an interesting start. I think if I remember correctly, when he enters in the auction, when Keenan Wynn says going once, 500 going twice, 500, and then at the very moment he's about to hit the gavel, Charles Bronson comes in for this $5,000, right? And then he comes in, I think, from left to right, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm in error about that particular detail. But I think that's an example of that sort of thing. And even when he confronts. Well, actually, let me just end there. So that kind of opening sequence, as I say, is filled with so many references, and we see also the title sequence, which is another thing there. We see the use of the non-use of music and the use of over-naturalized sound. We see also the pedigree of who came up with the story, who's credited with the story, Bertolucci and Argento and Leone, and Donati and Leone, and so and we see all this stuff that reminds us that this is an Italian production, and yet we are dealing with an Italian production film shot for the most part in Spain, with some very memorable sequences shot in the U.S. Monument Valley, of course, but for the most part shot in Spain, and then shot in studio in some places, in some parts of the film, and then. But it's also so it's almost like an homage to westerns. But it's also a reworking of westerns. It's also a creation of a new myth, a new modern cinematic myth, but it's also the deconstruction and almost the destruction of this American cinematic myth of the Western, I think personified so gloriously by the casting of Frank, Henry Fonda as Frank, and so many other things that we see along the way. But it's all packed, I think, in this particular sequence. So it's not just a sequence that is a cinematic marvel and a delight, but it's also very symbolic of the film on many levels. Both in terms of what it will do, in terms of how it will rely on specific references of Westerns. And we'll see all throughout the film references to so many Westerns. 310 to Yuma's there, Winchester 3 is there, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Searchers, of course, and the list goes on, and Stagecoach, the list goes on and on and on, A Shane, High Noon. And so, and if you want a better example or better understanding and of reference list, just listen to the commentary track that's here, and you can hear all the references that come up as the film is played. It's much better than me trying to very just give you an incomplete list. Let me put it that way. So, but that's not all. This is also a film that is dealing with a kind of cinematic use of space and time, and we see how things are shaped by the frame, but then made gigantic and large by the frame. And so we see, therefore, that the cinema here is in a kind of paradoxical way, trying on the one hand to really get at the real dirt and the grime and the real roughness of the space, almost in a kind of interesting way, trying to achieve a sense of realism. But we know that this is a Sergio Leone film, and this is not a film that is made 100% based on realism, but it's also not only a heightened realism, but what's also being termed as almost what people often describe as being operatic. I think we have to try to unpack exactly what that means, operatic. But if we take that to mean figures that stand in for bigger things, bigger ideas, bigger concepts, and also are shot in a way that make them mythical, then we have all that encompassed beautifully in this the opening sequence. And so it's not only a great tight opening sequence in terms of what it's doing in terms of cinematic entertainment and suspense, but it also is providing us with a lot of signals and cues of what we can expect when we go forward with this film. And it's incredibly dynamic. Incredibly dynamic indeed. I mean, the fact that Woody Strode is in the film and he gets shot and killed almost immediately is just actually, that was a kind of shocking moment for me too. I wasn't expecting that when I first saw the film, and so that's kind of an example of a surprise, and the surprises will keep coming as we get into the film proper. But this is a really great opening. So Alan, I agree. Actually, I agree with you. It could be one of the greatest openings ever. But it's certainly one of, and you say it's the greatest. So I would certainly not try to convince you otherwise, my friend. Okay, so Brian is here. Brian McGuire, hello. Mitch Rivers is here, hello. John Adair, hello. From Howdy Partners from Northern Ireland, as you say. Oh, that's great. It's nice to see you, my friend. Let's see. And okay. Cooper Glover, 1972. I liked it a little bit more when I watched it a second time a few days ago, but not by much. I just couldn't get into it. I thought maybe some people could change my mind. Possibly it really drags. Well, that's very fair, and I can let's see. I can understand what you're saying about that. Cooper Glover, you then add the music is great. The music is indeed great. It's excellent, Going to Hobbit says, Charles Bronson will always have a place in my heart because of this role in Once Upon a Time in the West. Yes, he's really brilliant. Actually, let's get into that. Let's get into, you meant the music is mentioned and also Charles Bronson is mentioned. So I think that's also a good way to try to get into the next part of the discussion, which is the characters of the film and how they are represented and what they represent. I think that's really important. You know, there are many characters in this film, of course, but I think we should focus on what are considered to be the four main characters. There are other main characters, but I would say that the four big ones are Harmonica, who's given that nickname by Cheyenne, who's another one of the four, and then there's Jill, and then there's Frank. And so let's talk about each one in turn. So Christopher Frayling, in his commentary, seems to suggest that each of the four characters has his or her own musical theme or motif or leitmotif. And actually, I don't think that's true. We know that Cheyenne has his own little sort of banjo-like theme, which is a very, it's then accompanied by a whistle, and it's very appropriate for his character and who his character is as a kind of lovable rogue, a man of the Old West, of course, and a lovable rogue who is a part of a time that is now dying and will soon become ancient once the train comes in and the new world will blossom. But that's one of the characters. But he has a theme. Jill seems to have a theme that's associated with her, which is the grand theme of Once Upon a Time in the West, the beautiful theme that we hear for the first time when she gets off the train at Flagstone, and when she's trying to find, obviously it was Patrick who was supposed to pick her up, but we know that Patrick didn't pick her up because Patrick was killed. And So no one is there to pick her up Flagstone, and then yes, and then we, of course, we get that famous camera movement when she gets into the train station and leaves, and then it goes over the building and gives us a full kind of panorama view of the town, Flagstone, the town, and it swells with the music, the Morricone music. It's one of the famous themes of the film, and we hear it intermittently scattered or woven into the film, and it's then reprised at the very end, of course, when after all the events of the film have been completed, and harmonica and Cheyenne say goodbye, and we see Jill walk out and give water to the railroad workers as a sign of she is, as Christopher Frayling describes, she is the grandmother of American history, one of the grandmothers of American history, and this is the perfect encapsulation of that. So the theme is associated with Jill, and so I think that's a pretty fair thing to describe it. And then we come to harmonica and Frank, and I would say that they seem both of them have the same theme, the harmonica theme and the guitar theme, which is also one of the main themes of the film. But Christopher Frayling seems to suggest that each of those two characters has his theme, but I don't think so. I think that their theme is the same, and so there are sort of three main themes instead of four. And the third main theme, which is the one that's associated with harmonica and Frank, is the one that is most suggestive of death. It's most suggestive of a kind of standoff. It's also suggestive of a real menace and drive and a kind of capitulation, not a capitulation, but it's a kind of standoff or face-off. Something's, as Cheyenne says, something's going to happen. Indeed, something will happen whenever we hear this theme. So, I think we can forgive the film for not necessarily giving Frank his own theme and then harmonica his own theme, because in fact we understand based on harmonica's flashback that in fact their pasts and their stories are so linked such that maybe they can be seen as being so closely tied that it's actually very apropos that they are given one theme to describe their actions respectively. So, so there is that kind of way that they are treated in cinematic and musical terms. And then I think that then lends itself very nicely to how this film is often described as being operatic. And then I was saying that we should try to break this down. What does that mean, operatic, in the context of this film? Well, first of all, it's used, the word operatic, of course, is derived from opera. And I think people are trying to say that this film is acting like an opera. And I suppose what we can derive from that is that it's like in certain modes of opera, we have characters on a stage that are sometimes represented, not all the time, but sometimes they're represented by a particular theme or leitmotif that then, travels with that particular character as he or she is progressing through the narrative or appears on stage and things like that. And so I think that kind of similar musical treatment is also at play here in Once Upon a Time in the West. So in terms of a strictly musical treatment of the characters, we can say it's very similar to that kind of treatment of characters in an opera, say. There's also an interesting thing that Christopher Frayling says, that one of the themes, I think Frank's theme, which has a very somber orchestration to it when he is riding his horse to the Morton train after his men have tried to kill him. Christopher Frayling has a great comment how the hoofs of the horse pitter-patter as it rides on the desert gives a percussion to the somber version of his theme as it's playing on the soundtrack. And he also says that the chords of that particular theme are derived from Mozart's Don Giovanni. And I'm not the biggest expert on Don Giovanni, but I can kind of see what he's saying. So there's also that kind of link in very general terms anyway. Again, I haven't proven that. I haven't really tested that particular assertion by Christopher Frayling yet, but let's take him at his word on this particular point. And then, so that's another link. And then, but also let's think about what opera does and what certain types of opera does with its characters. You know, sometimes opera comes in and rather than portray a kind of real version of events, they are heightened reality versions of events. And they are heightened, of course, because we see characters come in and express certain elements of story or feeling or character or emotion in song or in sung form. And this is a kind of really not real version, but it's an unreal version of how drama unfolds. And I think a lot also can be said about how the characters interact in the tableau of Once Upon a Time in the West. Their interactions don't necessarily seem like they would be realistic, right? Because they do tend to meet very frequently. The coincidences of them always meeting seems to be very common in this particular tableau. So it's not like the film is trying necessarily to capture a sense of realism, but it's more of a heightened sense of drama because the characters must meet and they must meet at crossroads at certain points of the beats of the film. And I think that is also, it's a creation of a heightened sense of drama, which I think is also reminiscent or reminds people of the heightened sense of drama in opera. And then also there's this idea of how we can have characters on stage or on the stage of the screen, of the cinematic stage, if you will. Characters can come in and stand in for certain things. And I think that's also very important. We see this in many films, of course. You know, characters in a film have a narrative significance or significance in the context of the narrative, and they stand in, they mean certain things in the film. Well, I think this is really important when we're thinking about, in particular, the four main characters, but also other characters too, like Morton. But if we think about the four main characters and what they represent, we can generally say, you know, in particular Cheyenne and Harmonica, they seem to represent the Old West, the lawless West. But it's lawless in the sense that there isn't any sense of an apparatus of justice, or they seem to be on the other side of that apparatus of legal justice. But it is not lawless in the sense that there is a moral code of ethics. There is a kind of cowboy code, right? There is the way in which Harmonica and Frank know that they must duel at the end, and they have this almost gentleman's code of conduct. The same is true for Cheyenne. He knows that he knows that Harmonica cannot stay and be with Jill because there's something inside him, a man like him, something to do with death. And this is, I think, inextricably linked with this notion of the gentleman's code. Even in a place that is lawless and where allegiances can turn on a dime, literally on a dime, because they can turn on money. What was I saying? Yes, so, but Cheyenne and Harmonica are part of this old world. And Cheyenne, I think, is also very key to that, because he is not just part of the old world, but he also represents the conduit, or he represents the means by which he can explain to people like us, the viewers, what exactly everything means. So he's almost like the translator, if you will, of certain code of ethics, and he explains things to Jill and the like. And so I find his position also to be very, very warm and affectionate in that way. And then we have Frank, who is representative of another aspect of this Old West, but also he is slightly different than Cheyenne and Harmonica in the sense that he is trying to be mobile. He's trying to be mobile in the sense he wants to move his societal position from that of a lawless man of the West to that of a respected businessman. And his move is centered on trying to get this tract of land, Sweetwater. And he will try to achieve it through any means necessary, even the most drastic, violent means. And so on the one hand, we have immediately this irreconcilable paradox that exists in the character of Frank. On the one hand, he wants to be a respectable businessman, but he will use unrespectable, unbusinessman-like means to do so. that is kill an entire family, try to take advantage of everything that he can, try to thwart the efforts of the auction, for instance, and that sort of thing. It's not like he's not trying. I mean, there are moments when he has certain glimpses of what it is he wants to do. I draw your attention to that it's kind of a strange moment, but it's also very important in that it reveals Frank's character. It's the moment where he is in bed with Jill. He has captured Jill, and they are in some kind of inside like part of the cave, and the bed is hanging in space. I think it's a very interesting setup. But we have that dialogue that he says about how, he said that really creepy line about, this makes me almost not want to kill you, and he also says that maybe I should settle down and marry you, and that would be the way for me to solve my problems, and to marry Jill, because at this time Jill is the owner of Sweetwater. But but he explains how maybe he could marry, then maybe that would solve his problems. But he realizes that it wouldn't work. And if you recall, the reason that he cites is not because of her, but it's because of him. He realizes that it's his own character that would probably get in the way of any kind of quote-unquote happiness that he could hope to achieve if he were to marry Jill. So that's another example of that irreconcilable conflict within him. That on the one hand, he wants like businessman respectability, and almost he in that particular moment with Jill, he's almost yearning for a kind of domesticity or normalness, which is really interesting. But then he realizes that he is incompatible with that kind of lifestyle, and so because of who he is and what he has done, he is in essence a kind of almost psychopath, and he is almost the embodiment of lawlessness, even though he, like Harmonica, also clings to a really interesting sense of a moral code of West ethics, right? And so, right, he doesn't pull a fast one on Harmonica at the end. He really sticks to the code at the very end. So that's an interesting little quirk, or not quirk, but it's an interesting little aspect of Frank's character. But I find him as being trying to straddle both sides, but failing to do so because of who he is. But he seems to represent the character that is part of the West, but is also trying to be mobile, class mobility, which is an interesting way of putting it. He's attracted by what Morton seems to have to offer, but he still has his own ways, and so there's a sense of irreconcilable class mobility that he represents. But then there is Jill, which I think is also very important, and I want to focus in on her because I think she is one of the most fascinating characters of this film. Jill also represents, I think, class mobility, but unlike Frank, where we could assert that Frank perhaps is an example of an unsuccessful attempt at class mobility because of who he is, and he acknowledges it such. But Jill actually represents, on the contrary to Frank, she represents a successful class mobility example. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, first of all, we understand that Jill was a prostitute in New Orleans, and in New Orleans she met Brett McBain, and they got married in secret, and it was decided that she would come to McBain's home here in Sweetwater, and then live with him and his family, his daughter and 2 sons. And so that was the plan, and that initiated her coming to this particular place, etc. And so she left her life behind in New Orleans to come here out in the West and become really a kind of wife of a pioneer man. And the plans of this man were very grand and very ambitious, as we know. He wanted to own this land. He didn't want to sell this land off, because as Harmonica says, you don't sell a dream of a lifetime. He wanted to live the American dream, which was a kind of success in a capitalist sense of the word, in terms of land ownership, in terms of prosperity that's based on on a sort of capitalist prosperity of a developing economy. And so, and she would have been the wife of that particular man. Well, circumstances of the film were such that she became the owner of this almost by chance. Not that she wanted to, but it just so happened that way. And she had nowhere else to go, really. And so the events led to such that she, maybe not by force of will in terms of what she wanted, but by chance, she dealt with the situation such that she ends up being in a different position class-wise than where she started at the start of the film, at least I would assert. And so, because she ends up becoming not only the owner of this place, not only the person who takes care of everyone. She is the mother of everyone. She is the grandmother of American history, or one of the grandmothers of American history. And so she really transcends her humble beginnings, shall we say, as described by the film in terms of her background. And I think that's really fascinating about her character. What's also fascinating about her character in the context of Westerns, I should add, is that, sometimes in American Westerns there is a way in which female characters are depicted. The sort of, the women who are either, they're like, I mean, it's not true for all Westerns, I know, but it's often seen that women are either classified as being prostitutes or virgins. And so there's this a divide between the two. And that's not a perfect comparison. That's not a perfect way of describing all Westerns, I grant you that. But there is this thing about mothers and prostitutes, right, and that sort of thing. Well, here we have an interesting way that this character is being depicted. She is from New Orleans, and so we know what her background is, and yet she's not necessarily depicted as like a what's the phrase, like a prostitute with a heart of gold. You know, that interesting character cliche that we often find not just in Westerns but in many films. I wouldn't necessarily classify her as being someone with a heart of gold necessarily. It's not like she's evil, but she is not someone who is is depicted as being so innocent and something like that. She's depicted as being someone who is really trying her best in the situations that she is finding herself, and she is just trying to do what she can. I mean, there's the moment after she goes to the McBain house after the funeral, and she rummages through the drawers, the assumption being that she's trying to look for the money. And so this is an interesting thing. That's an interesting show of her character, right? She's not necessarily respecting all of the McBain property, but it would almost suggest that she's really looking for a kind of financial way out, if you're looking at that scene in an almost cynical way of interpreting her character. But she grows into the role of grandmother of the American West, as it were. And it's another interesting thing. She also does not shy away from her sexuality and almost, I don't want to say use of sexuality, but her sexuality comes in very, very critically with her confrontation with Frank in particular. Frank is, the understanding is that Frank is probably out to kill her because he has up to now killed the rest of the McBain family. So what's to stop him from killing the only remaining survivor of that family, right? And so we see him in the middle of the film after, he's in the Morton train yes, he's in the Morton train, and Harmonica is there, and he captures Harmonica, and who are you? And he mentions all the names of the dead people, and who are you? And then he has to go find the woman, because Morton says, Frank, the woman, with the assumption being that Morton wants to make a deal with her, but Frank is probably wanting to kill her, and so that leads into the situation where Frank and Jill have their confrontation. Well, what happens? He doesn't kill her, right? He actually kidnaps her. That's the assumption, and goes to bed with her. There is an implication that he maybe forces himself on her as a kind of, as not kind of, but there's an implication that he is sleeping with her, raping her. Against her will, but what makes it quite complicated is that she seems, I don't want to say that she's kind of going along with it, because I think it's much more complicated than that on an emotional level, but she seems to be using her sexuality in a way to in essence get out of the situation, because she really has no other way other than being killed. And in fact, Frank has a really chilling line, which I mentioned earlier, which is that they're in bed and they're talking, or he's talking to her, and he says, this makes me not almost not want to kill you. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the key of that particular scene, I think, and that's the key. That's one of the key components of Jill as a character. She is using her sexuality in a way that's almost like using it as a defense in order to prevent her from getting killed. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. And so, but I would say also that she is not defined primarily by her sexuality, which I think is an interesting way of depicting it. I'm sure there might be critics of the film who might point to how her particular character is characterized and might look at it as being a masculine way of looking at female sexuality in the context of a Western film like Once Upon a Time in the West. Okay, I will listen to that conversation. That's for sure. But I do think that her character is much more complicated than merely being, let's say, a female character in an all-male Western film. Let me put it that way. And I think that she represents a role that is key if we look at the grand scheme of the metaphors of the characters, and also the way she is handling herself, because men look at her in a particular way that is probably objectifying her in a sexual way. But there's also something also quite complicated in that particular way of looking at her, as well as Cheyenne seems to suggest at the very end, with the railroad workers, and if they're all working hard, and if one of them should just come up and touch you on the behind, just pretend it's nothing, they've earned it. I mean, that sort of line, we can sort of separate whether we really agree with that kind of sexual politics or that kind of treatment of women. I mean, I think that's a legitimate issue, but that's I think a separate issue. But if you isolate that in terms of how men are looking at women in this film, then we can definitely say that we can extrapolate from this that there is something about how should I put it? The way that Jill as a character is operating in this universe, and how men are looking at her and also looking up to her, and she's filling in her role maybe as someone who is a woman that men are attracted to on the one hand, but also I think at the same time she is becoming a kind of mother figure or a grandmother figure. And that is, I think, something that is a very key way of looking at her particular character in this film. And as I say, as a kind of, she becomes the pioneer, right? She was the wife of the pioneer at the beginning, but now she becomes the pioneer. And that's what I mean when I say she is one of the grandmothers of American history. I mean, that's kind of another way of saying, a metaphorical way of saying that she becomes the pioneer. She is the pioneer that McBain could not become because he was killed. And so I think that is in many ways a very interesting way of depicting a kind of class mobility success in the context of Jill's character. And that's why I think she is actually very, very complicated and very complex. And a comparison between her character and Frank, the Henry Fonda character, is really interesting and really worth getting into if you're interested. But enough of me. Let me now go into the chat and we can go forward here. Okay, so thank you very much to Kubrick Lover for that prompt, and Gloin the Hobbit for that prompt. Let's see. Okay, I'm just going to skip over some of the okay. Okay, so Jan Hammer, I hope that's right, or it's Jan, but Jan, I think, Jan Hammer, hello. One of my favorite movies, Heart, Heart, Heart. Yes, mine too. Let's see here. Dr. Purple is here, hello. Okay, here. Let's see. Okay, sorry, I'm just scrolling through here. Okay. Huh, interesting. Okay. Okay, let's see. Tim is here. Tim Holm is here. Hello. Cine Arts, our dear friend, is here. Hello. Oh, gosh. Oh, gosh. Okay, I'm just going through here. Brian McGuire says, I have a soft spot for A Fistful of Dynamite. I said I wouldn't mention any other films, but I have to say it. Sean. All right, so let's see. All right, maybe one day I can talk about A Fistful of Dynamite. I talk about enigmas. That's probably one of those enigmatic westerns I've ever seen. Anyway, I'm okay. I should be quiet now. Okay, let's see. Gosh. All right. Alan, our dear friend, says, I love all the performances in the film, but I'm particularly enamored of Jason Robards' turn in this film, equal parts menacing and humorous. You know, that's really interesting, menacing and humorous. I'm glad you mentioned that, Alan, because it also brings me to another point about how I mentioned how he and Harmonica and Frank are of the same fabric, in the sense that they are representative of the old West, of the old ways that is basically going to become extinct once the railroad comes through. And I think in particular Frank and Cheyenne, of course, because they're going to die, leaving Harmonica all alone to drift wherever it is he's going to go, right, by the film's end or after the film's end. But Cheyenne is a very interesting character, because if you think about it, what is the difference between Cheyenne and Frank, right? I mean, Cheyenne is as much a cold-blooded killer as Frank is, if you think about it. But what makes him different than Frank, right? Why is it that when he kills, it's different than when Frank kills? And why is it that we side with Cheyenne but we don't side with Frank? I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. It's the same thing too, I think, for Harmonica. Harmonica's seen killing people as well. Who's to say that they would have family members that would want to seek vengeance for Harmonica killing their loved ones, just as Harmonica wanted to seek vengeance for what Frank did to him and his brother, and the other implications of that. And so that is to say that this is a world where I think there's a lot of interplay, and there's a lot of similarity between the characters, or among the characters, such that we kind of have to step back and think, well, what is it about Frank that makes him so menacing, and what is it about Cheyenne that makes him so almost lovable? We can really see that maybe their roles could be reversed, and it really wouldn't necessarily change much, at least in terms of the general dynamic of what this film is trying to do as a representation of the Old West and stuff. And so I always found that to be very interesting, the way that Cheyenne was depicted. Of course, we see him in a kind of heroic mode when he's trying to rescue Harmonica from the Morton train. When the way he talks, he calls Morton Mr. Choo Choo. He's the one who comes up with the name Harmonica. He has a kind of affection for Jill. He's also looking out for Jill, wants to protect her for some reason that's not really explained, except there's a kind of sense of duty, perhaps, because it was his dusters that were worn by people who ended up killing the McBain family, and also tried to kill Harmonic at the very beginning, right? Because inside the dusters were 3 men, right? Inside the men there were 3 bullets, and so. What was I saying? So maybe there's a kind of sense of duty that he has because of this mistaken identity that is kind of at play in the narrative. But to be perfectly frank, I would actually suggest that that's one of the more ambiguous parts of the narrative. It doesn't really quite seem to make sense to me even now, but it doesn't really matter because there are more important concerns of the film than that. But maybe that's the reason why he is so protective of Jill the way he is, and he is so he's formed a relationship with Charles Bronson that he has. But there really is a kind of ambiguity about his character, and the way we think about him and what he does is really quite interesting. And I would suggest that I would agree with you, Alan. He's both menacing and charming at the same time, and I really like that about his character. And in fact, he seems to understand his place, as it were, which is why I would think he is so resigned to death the way he is at the end. And so I find that complexity of his character to be quite rich, and it becomes even richer the more I think about it. So there's that. And I think if we were to continue with this comparison I tried to bring up with Frank, we see how sadistic Frank is. We really see how sadistic he is. And so I think that's the explanation as to how we can differentiate between Cheyenne, who is also a killer, and Frank, who is a really sadistic killer. I mean, he will go so far as to kill children, and he will go so far as to torture people and to really play with people's lives in a really dark and disturbing and quite sadistic way. So that's the reason why I think we can see that Frank is a bad guy and Cheyenne is a kind of good guy. But of course, I mentioned, I use air quotes, but I share Alan's description and feelings about this, and that it's actually a little bit more complicated and much more nuanced than just a good guy, bad guy appellation. But I should say that Frank is also one of the most. This is one of those great Henry Fonda performances. As I was mentioning at the very beginning, his entrance at the McBain Ranch, and after he's killed the entire family, except for Tim, of course, the little boy, of course, who's that shot of the boy with his toes pointed inwards as he's carrying the jar of something, just frozen there is just a shot. And then the way that Henry Fonda goes into the frame. I love so many things about Henry Fonda's performance, but the way he walks, he's got that wonderful Henry Fonda walk, He doesn't move his arms like this, but he sways his arms so gently at the same time. And you can see this so pronounced when he comes out from the brush at the very start of his first scene after he's killed all but one of the family. And the Ennio Morricone music swells, and we just see his silhouette, and we walk through. But he has that walk, and you're thinking to yourselves, that can't be Abraham Lincoln, that can't be Wyatt Earp, no way, right? But he's walking through, and then, of course, you've got that famous reveal. You start from the back, and you turn, and you go into, and you see the moment where right, according to Henry Fonda in that great interview clip, Parkinson, which is also on the Blu-ray here, it says, Sergio Leone on purpose wanted to cast Henry Fonda in this evil role of Frank because he could imagine the people sitting there in the audience as after, we've seen this family massacred, and we see the little boy standing there and this man coming into the foreground, and then the camera turns, and then as it turns and it reveals who he is, he can imagine the people in the audience saying, "Jesus Christ, it's Henry Fonda," right? So that's the moment, right? That's the big moment. And that's the moment that got me when I first saw this film as a kid. When I saw this film and I saw the back of the guy and the camera turn, and we see Henry Fonda. And it's the moment when he sees his face, he's got that wonder, that the music swells, and then he's chewing, the chewing tobacco. He's got that moment when he chews it, and his beautiful blue eyes are just sparkling. That's the moment that is, I think, it could be the biggest surprise I've ever come across in any film. And I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity to watch the film fresh like that, which is why I would suggest, my dear friends, while I'm on this point, whenever you talk about this film, Once Upon a Time in the West, to any of your other friends out there in the world who have not yet seen the film, please, I beg of you, do not mention Henry Fonda's role in this film. Try to keep those secrets secret until your friends have seen the film. Let us hope that the surprise can be preserved for them and it can be enjoyed by them as fresh as possible. Because I still remember to this day so fondly how surprised and shocked I was at that moment. And it just revealed to me the real essence of the power of Sergio Leone's cinema, to the point that I was really changed. It astonished me so much that I think it really changed me. As I say, I was at an impressionable age, and who knows, maybe if I hadn't seen that particular moment, I wouldn't have really ignited my interest in cinema the way that it did. And maybe I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about films on YouTube. I probably wouldn't be interested in films at all. But something about that moment really stuck with me. And it was just the gracefulness of Henry Fonda as his body moved. It was the stillness of his upper body is just like a dancer almost, and just the way that his graceful moves contrast so vividly with his character is wonderful. There's another moment too in the middle of the film when the sort of corpulent guy, what's his name, Wobbles, and he comes in, and this is after we realize that in Morton's train, this is after we realize that Harmonica has tailed him, and so Frank is really irate, and he lights his cigarello, and then he blows, or fans out the flame of the match, and he flicks it like that. You notice that when he flicks it at him just before he kicks him out, because how can you trust a man how can you trust a man who wears belt and suspenders, right? He can't even trust his own pants, right? So, and I just love that little flick of the match there. That's such a great moment, and it cuts also to the back, Henry Fonda's back, and he's moving. It's almost, and the way that his body is framed, it's very similar to how his back was framed at the beginning, just before he kills everyone at the McBain Ranch. But the way his back is shot, and the way it's just so still and almost motionless, almost like a zombie, or not a zombie, but it's like a skeleton or something like that. I don't know. It's like a ghost or something. It's just so almost ballet-like, the way it glides, and it reminds me so much of how Charles Bronson's character glides also in and out of the frame, just so poetically and beautifully. There's something really magnificent about the contrast that's generated between the gracefulness of Henry Fonda's movements and his blue eyes and everything he brings to the role, all the baggage and everything, all the pedigree that he has as an actor, and as an actor of westerns and dramas, but then also as Abraham Lincoln, right? He, as Christopher Frayling described it, he described playing Abraham Lincoln as being as being like playing Jesus Christ. And so this is that stature of actor coming into this role and still bringing with it the gracefulness and poetry that he brought to all of his iconic roles up to this point is just a stroke of genius. This is a stroke of genius. This is the type of stuff that we really should cherish, and we should try to preserve this potential surprise for as many people as possible. So I always make a point, my friends, never, ever to talk about this film, and I will never say, oh, Henry Fonda was the bad guy. Never. It will never come from me. I don't. If someone says that in a comment or something, I don't correct that person. That's fine. Everyone is free to explain it the way he or she wants to explain it. Of course, I have nothing against that. But it has always been my hope that when people talk about this film, we always try to make sure that we all have seen the film. And if there's someone who hasn't seen the film, we'll try. I always want to be as respectful of that as possible because of this moment and how much it meant to me. So if ever you're in that position, I would just urge you to not talk about it unless you know that the other person you're talking with has seen the film, because again, the surprises are so worth feeling for that initial shock alone. It's so great. But oh gosh, what was I saying? Should I get into that? Yeah, let me get into that now, which is the one of the things also that I wanted to bring up, which is the way in which this film is shot, and the close-ups, and the way that the rugged natures of the wrinkles on the face, and the pores, and the lines are almost, I mean, it's been described by many people much better than I, much more expressively than I, but being almost like similar to how Monument Valley is shot in the rock faces and that sort of thing. These people are almost like history etched in stone, except not etched in stone, but etched in the faces of these characters. And the camera almost lovingly goes up really close, and we see all the dark sweat, in some instances tears, the stubble, and all this stuff that really represents a rugged American West feel. I don't know how else to describe it. But there's also this focus in Sergio Leone's cinema, but in particular in this film, my friends, there's this focus on the visage and the human face, and the way in which the camera really goes in close and takes a look at the human face really opens up, in my view anyway, a conversation about how complicated, how beautifully complicated the human face is in registering emotion and registering feeling, right? Because one of the things that is almost like an existential issue that I've tried to bring up in other films, but one of the main dilemmas of existence is trying to understand the feelings of the other, of someone else, because they are outside of our own consciousness. And so there's no way for us to know through direct experience what another person is feeling. We can only get registers and signs and little symbols and little cues based off of words we hear, things we see, actions we can perceive, and also the looks on people's faces. And I think when thinking about that, this film, Once Upon a Time in the West, and the way it's shot, and the close-ups on the faces, and the eyes in particular, I think become very important. Here's a very key example of that. Smiling. When you look at this film again, take a look at how well and how complicated the film looks and closes in on the human face, and in particular the human face when it smiles, and the moments that the characters smile in this film and what those smiles mean really adds so much dimension and so much depth to these characters, in such that smiles mean different things to different people at different times. And I find that also so fascinating about this film. Here's an example. Remember when Frank is confronting the little boy after he's killed the rest of the McBain family, and it goes in, it has that famous turn of the camera, and goes into him, and then it goes into his face, and then we get a cut into his face. It's almost a full-on close-up of his face, and we see him smile. We see him smile, and he's looking at the little boy, and we can realize that he's probably thinking, as he's smiling, "Oh, I'm not going to kill him." But soon after that, right, one of his henchmen says, "What are we going to do this one, Frank?" And he calls him by name. And he says, after he gives a little spit of the chewing tobacco, right? Then he says, "Now that you've called me by name," he then pulls his gun. He pulls his revolver, his pistol, out of his holster, and he points it at the boy. And then the boy is seen there, and you can see some tears forming in his eyes, or sort of falling out of the corner of his eyes there. But then it goes back to Fonda's face. And what does he do when the camera closes in on his face this time? What does he do, my friends? He smiles again. In the same sequence of shots, we see the same character smile two different occasions, and the smile means a different thing. And that is chilling. That is so chilling. And it just, I can't, I've thought about this so much ever since I was a kid. I was like, that is so amazing. The smile that is almost seconds apart, two smiles that are seconds apart from each other, can mean completely different things. And it just, that adds further dimension to how twisted and also how complex Frank is as a character, and how he can turn on a dime and still register the same smile or emotion. It's just a great thing. And also, I mean, there are other great moments of smile. Like the other great smile that I love is at the final duel between Harmonica and Frank. After, you know, it's the standoff, and we see they're in the back of the house, right? And they find a little stretch of land where no one's there, it's just the two of them. And of course, this is the final duel, and we see one character come in. Again, we see Bronson coming in from the right part of the frame, and his hat, the brim of his hat cuts in, but it's him again gliding from the right front of the frame into the frame. And then we see Fonda from the other perspective come in like this, and then it pulls back, right? It does that little thing where it goes up, and then we see Fonda walk so slowly, and again with that wonderful Henry Fonda walk with the arms swaying at the same time rather than alternately. And he looks, and he's looking around, and he's trying to get a good enough spot so the sun isn't in his eyes, right? And he fixes a spot, and as the camera follows him, it goes back to a perspective of a shot of Bronson standing there with one foot on a log, I think, and then the camera's turning, and he's just standing there, but he's not moving. He's inert in space, but it's turning like this, and then it goes, and when Fonda stops and finds a spot, it stops on Bronson again. And it goes up into his face, and what happens? What does Bronson do? He smiles, and he walks towards Fonda, and gets ready and gets in position for the final battle. That smile too is so brilliant, because it's almost like, remember what the Harmonica's character has been through his entire life, ever since that terrible thing happened to him with his brother in the flashback. His entire life has been building up to this moment. All that he has been doing essentially has been building up to this moment. And when it's here in front of him, the moment when it arrives, what does he do? It's the most dangerous moment in his life. It could mean life or death. And in fact, it could possibly mean his death. We don't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's going to happen. The music becomes a swelling rush of emotion and grandeur, and then just turns and it goes into his face. And then what does he do at this ultimate moment of life and death? What does he do? He smiles, and he just goes in. That is so poetic. That is so poetic. That smile means so much, especially when we understand what the Harmonica character is. And I think that is great. I mean, is it a smile that's registering resignation, an understanding that he will die? Maybe is it a sign that he acknowledges that this is the end? Is it a smile saying, he's acknowledging the righteousness of the moral code of ethics? Is it a smile that's registering that this is the moment that he's been waiting for? Or is it just almost a nonchalant sort of thing, like he almost doesn't care about what's going to happen in a very odd, almost paradoxical sort of way? I mean, it can read into so many things, and I think each different interpretation of that can lead one into a different area of interpretation of the Harmonica character as a whole. And I therefore find that smile to be so poetic, magnetic, important, and quite crucial. And that's another example, not only of the use of the camera by Leone and crew to capture the rugged features of the visage and the face of a human being, a character on screen, but also to show us how certain registers and motions and movements of the eye, and yes, smiles, can lead one into different avenues to interpreting characters one way or another. And again, that adds to, dare I say it, the poetry of this particular type of cinema, Once Upon a Time in the West. I find this to be quite I mean, just go into the film, see the times when the main characters are smiling. Jill, that wonderful smile she has, right, where they're waiting inside, she and Cheyenne are waiting inside. They don't know who won the duel, and then when she sees the door open, we see the light from the open door shine on her face, and that gives the camera the chance to go into her face. And what does she do? She smiles. Again, that's a perfect moment too. That's so poetic, because what does that smile mean? It means so much at that moment, right? Because we understand now, but at this moment in the film, maybe she has developed feelings for harmonica that might be almost romantic. After all that he has done for her, of course, in terms of the auction and saving her life with the people, the two members of Frank's gang early in the film, etc. But there's something more of an attraction, perhaps. And that smile could mean that. It could mean relief. It could mean a certain joy, or it could mean something else in terms of her now role as the pioneer of this particular place, homestead. And so, and that I mean that pioneer beyond a role of sort of domesticity, but it's something much more. It's something much more of a, you know what I mean when I was talking about that earlier. But my point is that the smile, even on her face here at this moment, lends itself to a poetic reading of the film that can go in many different directions. And again, yes, depending on the direction that you take, that is a way of reading this particular character, thus giving more possibility and poetic possibility to this particular moment. It's, again, an example of how this is operating on so many levels throughout the film. But just look at the smiles and the way it goes. And right, even Jason Robards' Cheyenne, there's a moment earlier in the film when he's about to leave after meeting Jill in her house, and he says, you remind me of my mother. And he smiles at that moment too. So what could he be thinking at that moment when he's saying that? And I find that to be great. And that also, that's such a great moment, because that smile also distills and encapsulates and cements at that particular moment exactly why Jill is as important as she is. Because she is really a mother figure, not just to the people here, but to the entire landscape of the American West, in one way of putting it. And that smile seems to cement that. The smile by Cheyenne seems to cement that really well. So the way that the camera captures the human face, but also the way it captures smiles and other registers of human emotion, that's a key point of this film, and of any other Leone film, in my opinion, but in particular, my friends, this film. And so if you're going to watch this film again, just check on how this kind of register of human emotion is portrayed on the film, and what you read into those moments. It adds to the poetry of the film, in my opinion. All right, sorry about that. Let me just go here. Okay, let's see. Dr. Purple here, Brian, Dr. Purple. I think there is a discussion of a fistful of dynamite, which is great. Let's see. This Ella Banks is here. Hello. Oh, it's very kind of you, Ella. You inspire me. Your channel produces the best content most film channels that discuss movies don't have as wide a variety as yours. That's very, wow, that's so kind and generous. Thank you. People don't appreciate less popular films like you guys. Go, thank you very much. Well, that's very kind of you, Ella, and very kind. Well, I'm very touched. Thank you, but nothing to do with me. I mean, the films. I mean, the films are the reason why I'm able to talk about them, and other people are able to talk about them. So I have to thank the films and the great people who inspire great film discussion. So I'm just happy to be along for the ride. But thank you so much, Ellie. That's very kind of you, my dear friend. Thank you. Let's see here. Just going through it again. Let's see. Let's see here. Okay. Oh yeah, Elliot Cohen says, we watched this in a film club screening during my time at university, and many took offense at how Claudia Cardinale is shown in the film. Yes, I can understand that, and I've met people who are not impressed with the way in which Jill is characterized in the film, and how her character is treated by many of the characters in the film. I mean, this is my way of describing her, though. If I were to try to explain it, I'm not defending how her character is portrayed, and my way of looking at her character is not a reflection of how I feel about how the male characters treat her in a very rough and violent and terrible way at times. But I think what she represents, and also how she is depicted as using, as being someone who isn't necessarily shamed by the storytellers. She's not shamed because of she's not shamed due to the fact that she was a prostitute, right? But in fact, she is she seems to be trying to do the best that she can in an environment that is depicted in the film that is, shall we say, not always friendly. Yeah, I can understand how people might feel like her depiction of her character might be offensive, but I would say that, and I'm not suggesting that that's what you're saying, but that's what you're describing, what your experience was with the terms of a particular screening at school. But I would actually suggest that it's a little bit more complicated than that, as I was trying to suggest earlier. But you know, I'm not here to try to say that this is the best ever depiction of a female character in a film ever, because I mean, that's not the point of my comment. But you know, I can understand how people would feel that way. That's definitely true. I can definitely understand that. Okay, let's see here. Okay. Jared says, I saw this on TV the first time when I was about 12 or 13. Saw lots of movies during that time and loved it as much as the Dollars trilogy. Great, that's really great. Evron, excuse me, Evhron. So Evron says, just watched it the other day for the first time. Great movie. Oh, good job, good job. Tim Holmes says, I still badly want to visit Monument Valley someday because of this film and John Ford's. Let's see. Wolfgrat says, oh, well, I really like the character leitmotifs. Let's see here. And there's a discussion. Wolfgrat, yeah, so I was talking earlier about my father and the gunfight at the old K Corral. Wolfgrat is picked up on that. Thank you very much, my friend. Thank you, thank you. I still remember him in the kitchen, and so he's just, yeah, it's one of the fond memories I have of him. So he loved Westerns. My father really loved Westerns, and so, but I don't think he ever, did he? Gosh, he loved Good, Bad, and the Ugly. He just loved that film so much. Oh, gosh, all right, let's see here. Oh, Rachel, Rachel. Oh, it's not a problem. I'm so glad to see you, my friend. How are you? I'm always happy when I see you, Rachel. It's so great to see you. Rachel's channel, by the way, is excellent. The Music Man VC, excellent. Oh gosh. I'm thinking one of these days I'd love to do a Hard Day's Night as a live stream. And if so, I want to dedicate that to Rachel. So one of these days, we must make that happen. So, oh gosh. All right. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through the chat here. So, okay. Oh, Arcinius here. Hello, my dear friend. So Arcini says, a little too self-consciously artful for my liking. For a few dollars more is better. Fair enough, my friend. That's, I totally understand that that viewpoint. Let's see. Tim Holmes says, this movie is amazing, but it honestly wouldn't be half as good as it is without the Morricone score, which is truly one of the greatest of all time. I agree. I absolutely agree, and I think it's a very interesting score because some of the themes, the actual recordings or renditions are used over and over, there's this interesting interplay with music that's in the world of the film versus music that's outside of the world that's applied through a musical soundtrack. The idea of diegetic and non-diegetic sound, and it's played, I think, quite artfully. Excuse me. It's played quite artfully in the way that the harmonica is used. But I really liked. I love the harmonica theme in particular. And how that has the sort of standard orchestration of it that was used over the killing of the McBain family at the beginning, but then it's also used in the duel setup between Frank and harmonica at the end there, and it also there's a little bit of an editing, so it kind of ends and then it's edited back. There's a little bit of the beginning or it's reprise, but it's a forced edit to make, because it's taking account of how long Frank is walking, so it does that little da da da. It repeats it, but it's a forced edit. So I like that part. And then when it goes into the flashback. It uses a different orchestration of that theme, which I think is really quite powerful. It kind of extends part of the final stretch of the I don't know what you call it in music terms, but it's what's the phrase? I'm forgetting the musical phrase, but it's the final build-up before it reaches the final climactic note. It stretches out that moment in particular when it goes into the cuts of all the men looking on as the brother's standing there with the noose around his neck in this kind of Roman arch, which is in the middle of nowhere, which is such a wonderful piece of iconic architecture in any cinema film, I think. But there's that moment when the camera does almost an Eisensteinian montage cuts of all the men, including Frank. And there's a particular moment where you see Frank's face head on like this, and it cuts, and then it cuts back to Frank's face again, but it's now looking up. It reminds me, I don't know if you know The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, but there's a moment where Tippi Hedren is looking at a line of gasoline that's being on fire, and it goes like this and this and this and this. It reminds me a lot of that kind of filmmaker. There's a moment where Henry Fonda is like this, and then cuts to someone else, and then cuts back to him like this. So you don't see his head move. That's an interesting thing. But then we see his head move back down when he looks back down at the young harmonica. In this moment. Why was I saying this? But yeah, but the point is that there's a different orchestration of that particular theme used over this montage, this particular flashback moment, which I think is a really dramatic, swelling moment, film of music of the film, and it just escalates and it climaxes at the point where the brother essentially kicks the young harmonica down. So he doesn't have to bear the burden of him having killed his brother, in that last sort of valiant act of a brother who loves his brother. That is such a right. Keep your loving brother happy. My goodness, that is what a powerful moment that is. And I love this moment too, because I think Christopher Frayling makes a great point in the commentary, which is that the moment where we experience this flashback is in the great close-up of Charles Bronson, and it goes into the flashback and then cuts back to the present day Charles Bronson. It goes right into his eyes in one of the most striking close-ups of any character in any Leone film ever, and we see the the way the eyelids are sort of slanted diagonally almost, and almost a tired, quite worn out way almost, but still very beautiful and very lovingly portrayed, the eyes of Charles Bronson. And what was I saying? But yeah, and this is the first time when we experience the flashback and we know exactly what's going on, and then we see the flashback end with the final haunting slow motion image of the young boy falling with the harmonica in his mouth, falling, and as he impacts the ground, the harmonica just falls out of his mouth, and the final ring of the bell of the music is overlaid on the soundtrack, and then it cuts swiftly to the shot the gun battle, and then boom, it's done in an instant, and we realize that Frank has lost. And then what happens next? As he's there dying, the death rattle, he pulls, harmonica pulls the harmonica, rips it off of the cord around his neck, shows it like this, and puts it into his mouth. And then we go into Henry Fonda's close-up, and those beautiful eyes, almost attracting our attention the way that Charles Bronson's eyes just moments earlier attracted our attention. And we see that just as Charles Bronson's eyes indicated a moment where we see the flashback and the young boy falling down, here Henry Fonda's eyes show the exact same moment of the boy falling down, the harmonica in his mouth falling out as he hits the ground. And Christopher Frayling says it great. Those two characters are in that moment linked by the same flashback. That is another way that those two characters are linked, and that's another example of why, as I was saying in the beginning, how each character has his or her own theme, except for the Bronson and Fonda characters. Well, I think this is one of the reasons why, because they are linked not only in terms of time and space, but also in terms of theme and emotion and content, right? The harmonica links both of them. And that, I think that's personified or expressed so visually perfectly by the fact that they're in essence sharing the same flashback at this particular moment. That's a great observation by Frayling, I think. But anyway, just continuing on here, and we shall just it's after 1 a.m. here, so I can go on for a few more minutes, but I might have to start shutting down soon. But let me just go to the chat here and just see here. I'm sorry, I'm just skipping around. Yeah, there's talk here about how the harmonica playing parts, Cooper Glover says, the harmonica playing parts are sort of annoying. I also didn't like the Cheyenne themed parts of the music. Yeah, I can understand that. The harmonica, the way it sounds on the soundtrack, it seems a little bit overlaid. I can certainly get that, but I think that the opening, if we go back to Alan, our dear friend Alan's comment about the opening of the film, really sets all this up for us in terms of the way that sounds are used. They're not just sound, they're really cranked up sounds. And so they're almost to the point of being unnatural, very unnatural. And that's the point of the film, I think. And so the harmonica is just one aspect of that. And so we are given the setup early on, and we're given the film grammar early on, and a kind of what is in store for us kind of thing is given to us at the very start of the film. And so yeah, I think that's but I understand what the criticisms are, so totally okay if you found those aspects of the film annoying. That's on the film, right? That's how we react to the film, and that's our natural reaction, so that's perfectly fine. Let's see. Okay. Tim Holmes says there's a certain nostalgic, elegiac quality to this film which I can't shake. I agree. I absolutely agree. And Wolfgrat says, and that horrible smile from Frank as he kills people. Yes, I was referring to the smile. It's very complex, as I was trying to suggest, but yeah. And Tim Holmes says, and Henry Fonda's character shocked me in his brutality. You're not the only one, my friend. Shocked me too. Let's see. Cooper Glover 1972 says Leone said he couldn't get a handle on the film because it was just getting too long. Did he say that? I'm not sure. If you can let me know where he said that, or what book cites that. I'd love to know more information about that. But okay. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I just skipped down here. All right, I always have an issue with the chat. Okay. Let's see. Okay, sorry about this. I'm just trying to find myself in the chat here. Just give me 1 second. Okay. There's a lot of discussion here about westerns. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, but this. Okay. Great. Sorry, but this is one of the things about YouTube and live streaming is that the live chat is a little bit difficult for me to navigate through, just because it's kind of a difficult thing. But that's not anyone's fault, but it's my fault more than anything else because I have to get used to it. But okay, I'm just trying to get here as much as possible. So just hold on here while I just try to get to where I was before, and we will go from there. Sorry about this, but please continue talking. Okay, sorry about this, my friends. Okay, here we go. Now I might be skipping over a lot of comments. If I missed your comment, please accept my apologies. Shandan Rawal is here. Let's see. Claudia Cardinale was the hottest actress in Italy. Costini is Daisuke's fave. Yes, I know what you're. Yes. I read your comment. So, yes, we'll have to. We'll have to talk about Stefania Cassini in another video. Let's see here. Gung Fu. Oh, Gung Fu is here. Yes, hello. Yes, I read your comment, Gung Fu, about the Bruce Lee. So thank you very much. It's nice to meet you. Yes, I was going to respond to your comment, but I don't know, maybe it was gone, or I don't know what happened to it, but I did catch a little bit of the comment, and so it was really nice to read, and so thank you very much for that. Yes, and you came from Huss's channel, A Touch of Film, a great channel, by the way, so it's nice to meet you, Gung Fu. Yes. Let's talk about Bruce Lee films some more when that Criterion set comes out. Let's see here. Okay. I mean, Claudia Cardinale. I mean, there's a discussion of Claudia Cardinale, and I mean, there's some amazing moments in this film. Claudia Cardinale and Paolo Stoppa as Sam, you know, the carriage driver, the coachman, and there's a pedigree, of course, Claudia Cardinale and Visconti, and Paolo Stoppa and Visconti as well. So it's like a Visconti reunion in many respects, and Italian cinema being represented. Of course, Claudia Cardinale having worked with Visconti and Fellini, and so. There is a lot here that's not just an expression of American cinema, but also, and I mentioned also that the actors bringing their pedigree as actors in iconic westerns and other American films. Well, I think the same is true for the Italian actors in this cast as well. So, and you know, people like Paolo Stoppa, but also obviously at the front and center is Claudia Cardinale. So. That's really great. Okay, sorry about this. Where was I? Let's see. Jared Wignall has a great point here. Harmonica seems to be defending himself more throughout the film. Harmonica and Cheyenne both are revenge-driven. Frank appears to be a cold-blooded killer. Oh, that's an interesting point. Let's see. Mark L. says Cheyenne's music makes him sympathetic. That is an excellent point. Yes, that is an excellent, but I agree with you. Carl Reese says, I've gone this whole chat without mentioning that I have a Once Upon a Time in the West screensaver on my phone, and my ringtone is the harmonica guy theme. That is great. That is absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I am very impressed, my friend. Dr. Purple says Frank kills for personal gain and harmonica kills to help others in danger. Yes, including Frank. Yes, that's a very good point. And you continue, Cheyenne is interesting because he seems to be a combination of the two. That's an excellent way of describing it. Very excellent, Dr. Purple. Yes. Okay, I'm just skipping through here. LJ, hello, my friend. One is good, one bad, and the other is ugly. Let's see. Just skipping through here. Sorry if I'm okay. Rob Tapscott had to chime in here. My ringtone is from work was the good, the bad, and the ugly. Very nice. Yes. Okay. Director Ryrie says, I love how my two favorite film villains are called Frank. That is Frank Booth, Blue Velvet, interesting, and Frank from Once Upon a Time in the West. That's very interesting. Gemma says, Frank's entrance is so chilling, just a masterclass in filmmaking suspense. Yes, yes. Pete 1972 says harmonica would be the good, Cheyenne would be the bad, and Frank would be the ugly. Would that be spot on? Oh yeah, and also that there have been all these connections with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and stories about what if Clint Eastwood were in this film, and other people from the Dollars trilogy were in this film. There are some actors that appeared in the Dollars trilogy that also appeared in this film. So there are some interesting ties to that earlier work that I think you're referring to, and also Jared had also mentioned as well. Mark L says, great transition shoot from the gun to the train. Yes. You're referring to Fonda shooting the gun and then going into the out of focus shot of the train screeching, as it's entering into town. Let's see here. Sorry about this. Give me 1 second. Okay. And yes, Carl Reese then says, Fonda's evil little smirk before pulling the trigger cold. Yes, the smile. Yes, I agree. Okay. Let's see. Iacona 23, hello. Daisuke's remarks about the Henry Fonda reveal are really, really causing me to want to buy the Blu-ray and watch it again. Oh, great. Yes, it's absolutely. I said what I said about it, and it's not enough, I think, because I could go on and on just how much that affected me. Solitary Ronin Films, our dear friend, Solitary Ronin Films. What a great guy, what a great channel, what a great friend. Solitary Ronin Films. If you haven't checked out Solitary Ronin Films, go there right now. Solitary Ronin Films. Subscribe. It's great. He talks about more films than I do. Absolutely fantastic. Let's see. Twisted Razors here. Hello. It's nice to see you, my friend. Gosh, it's nice to see all my friends here. You guys are great. Let's see. Iacona 23 continues. Daisuke is absolutely right about Henry Fonda's movement and body language. Many truly great actors have a unique way of using body language, such as Toshiro Mifune. Yes, that is such a great thing. I was gonna say that, but I resisted. But you're absolutely right. The other great body language performance, I think, is by Toshiro Mifune, and in particular Yojimbo, the Kurosawa film Yojimbo. And I always loved this because I actually I remember seeing Yojimbo around for the first time around the same time that I saw Once Upon a Time in the West for the first time as a kid growing up. And so not only are those two films linked in my mind in terms of my memory and how I experienced the films for the first time as a kid, but you are so right, Iacona 23, in that those two actors are so physically or graceful in terms of their physicality. They're so graceful in terms of their physicality. In particular, Mifune in the film Yojimbo, and then also Henry Fonda in this film Once Upon a Time in the West. I love Henry Fonda's physicality also in My Darling Clementine and things, but in this film in particular, there's something about how his graceful body movements in some innate visual way contrast so starkly with the nature of his evil character. Thank you very much, Ayakona23, for saying that about Mifune, by the way. Yes, yes. Yojimbo in particular. That is one of the that graceful way. Okay, yeah, I should stop right now. I don't want to talk about Yojimbo. I'm going to, if I start, I won't be able to stop. So, okay. Okay, let's see. All right. Gosh, all right. I'm just going through the chat here. Yeah, there's talk about the Blu-ray cover. I think Mark L's talking about the Blu-ray cover. Actually, I don't like this Blu-ray cover because it's the moment. It's you know, we know the film. This is the moment. I don't like it because of Frank, because this is the moment when Frank is about to die. And I really hate that when Blu-ray covers give little things like that. I know you can't really tell from the cover, so if you don't know the film, I know it's not really giving away, but it's the moment where after he gets shot. And so I hope, you know, you can even see the bullet hole in the claw in the shirt. So if you're a really keen-eyed observer of these Blu-ray covers and you don't know the film, you can kind of guess that maybe he's been shot. And so I actually don't like this particular cover myself because it kind of gives it away. But you know, if you're not looking for that, then it's still okay. So yeah, let's see. Anyway, all right, okay. Let's see. All right, again, I'm just skipping over a lot of the chat here. When I talk, there's a delay. And especially now because I think there are a lot of people who are in the chat talking. So my comments, I apologize because when I talk, the chat goes on, and then after like an hour, I go back to that part of the chat. So I'm really late. So I apologize for the delay, but I hope you can understand. Okay. Let's see. There's a talk of other westerns, which is really wonderful. Kai is here. Kai Berg is here. Hello. That's great. This was one of my father's favorite movie, and that gives this movie a very special place in my life. My father died plus 30 years ago. Memories of great movie moments. That's really lovely. Kai, I'm glad. I'm really glad. I'm so happy that you shared this with us. Yeah, there's something also about not just films that we experience, but films that our parents or people that we loved growing up, or that were maybe guardians to us growing up, or people who we looked up to growing up, about their favorite films and how that also affects us and the films that we love today. There's something really fascinating and quite lovely about that. So Kai, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm just scrolling through the chat here. I'm almost done. And Dr. Smurfo, hello. Jill is like the future of the American West to come, while it seems Frank, Harmonica, and Cheyenne are the Old West dying out. Yes, and the way that if I can borrow that metaphor, I can also say that people like Frank and Morton are also representatives of the future, if you will. In particular, Morton, but Jill is the one that survives, and Morton is the one that does not. And so I think that says a lot about her role in the film. Let me put it that way. So very good. So let's just continue on. Yeah. Dr. Smurfo says you're about too many. Yes. I love the way also there's some, for some reason it always stands out the way that Charles Bronson's lines oftentimes involve numbers, him talking about numbers. You know, you brought two too many, or inside the dusters there were 3 men, inside the men there were 3 bullets. $500 going once, 500 going twice, $5,000. You know that there's you can count all the way up to 2, and then Cheyenne says all the way up to 6 if I have to, or something like that. But there's an interesting thing about how his dialogue is linked with numbers, not all the time, but some of the time. Let's see here. Okay. Again, scrolling down, and whoops, here we go. Okay, close. All right, I'm just about to wind down the discussion, so sorry if there's been a kind of a lull in my conversation here, but I'm just going through the chat. And Markel says having a cold, Daisuke. Is there something in my throat or my voice? I don't know, but I don't have a cold or anything. I don't think so. But if it's in my voice, maybe it could be due to the lateness of the hour for me. I'm not sure, but let's see. Okay, I'm almost at the end here, and let's see here. Solitary Ronin Film says, the reveal of the origin of the harmonica is wonderful, continues the sadism of good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. Let's see. Oh, Luca Zach Forever is here. Hello. Daisuke, do you know that Ennio Morricone and Sergio Leone were classmates in primary school? Two geniuses in the same class. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. All right, I'm almost at the end here. Ben is here. Yes, they call them millions. Yes, there's another number. Yes. Juan Martinez, hello. One Western movie for newbies to watch with my wife at dinner time. This one, maybe. I think so. I think, although this film for a newbie, there's a kind of joy in watching this film, knowing some of the references made to other Western films, and so maybe watching other Western films first if you're interested in the Western genre. But you know, if you want to go straight for this film, I think that's also great. So let's see here. Okay. Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader, our dear friend, one of my favorite YouTube channels ever. What a great guy. Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. I just love saying that name. Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. Well, at least I made it for the end. I agree on the cover. I much prefer the DVD cover. Yes. It looks kind of like what the back is here, if I recall. But yeah, I don't like this. I really don't like it. That Henry Fonda. Just use a different pose of Henry Fonda. There's so many great poses of Frank. Don't use the one where he's about to die, and you can actually see him shot. So, but anyway, never mind. I'll leave it at that. So, okay, all right. So let's see. I am at the end. All right, and okay. And Jared and Mark, Solitaire Ronin. Cephaloclod is here. I hope I get that pronounced correctly. If Cephaloclod, if I get that wrong, please let me know. I might have asked you before, but yeah. Hey Daisuke, hope you're doing well. Real quick, who's that standing on the other side of the window behind you? I don't know. Is there someone behind me? I don't know. I hope not. It's just a window. It's a reflection, but I hope there's no one behind me. There shouldn't be. If there is, that would really scare me. But I don't think there's anyone behind me. It's just a reflection of the glass, I think. But okay. And Cephaloclad, thank you very much. Cephaloclad, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we have been at this for about 2.5 hours, I think, give or take. So let me now just wind down the conversation, and we can just begin to call it a day here. But let me just say, I think I've said more or less what I wanted to say about the way that the camera, Leone uses the camera, the use of close-ups on faces, the music, the unpacking the way the description of this as an operatic film. The certain characteristics of certain characters, my own personal feelings of the film and how it impacted me, and the more I think about it, the more I realize that yes, this is probably the most this is probably the biggest surprise for me. And I described about how I reacted to the reveal of Frank in the film, and also the gracefulness and the ethereal quality of harmonica and Charles Bronson's performance, and also the way in which the film is obviously an homage to westerns, but also it's I guess I didn't mention this, but let me just say it's also a deconstruction of the myth and the destruction of those Western myths and the American West myths, and well, I guess I did because that's personified I think most vividly in the casting of Henry Fonda as Frank, as well as other things, but. And so ultimately, this film comes down to, I think, many different levels and many different approaches, and even bits of poetry that can lead off into further bits of interpretation into character and narrative setting, depending on what avenue of interpretation you are most fond of. And so I think this is at once a grand epic scale film. It is an entertainment film. Oh yes, that's one thing I wanted to say as I was going to end. This is an entertaining film, but it's also, if you think about it, it's a very simple film. The plot is very, very simple. It's a plot that is essentially about a guy owns a piece of land, hopes that it's going to bring him wealth and fame and fortune. He gets killed. His wife comes in, takes over the piece of land. The train baron hires a gang to try to take over the land, muscle his way through, sees it's not successful. There are other people that come and try to protect the land, and then there's a showdown between the good guy and the bad guy. The end. That's essentially the plot of the film. It's stretched out, though, over whatever it is, 165, 166 minutes, depending on what version you watch, of course. And I think that means that on the one hand, the plot is important, but it's also, and I mean this in a positive way, almost not important. It's almost like its own little MacGuffin in a way, or it's in a way an excuse to get the ball rolling in terms of staging Western genre scenes and action scenes and close-ups and characters moving, these people that represent other things and how they move in and out of frame, how they connect with each other, how they interact with each other, how they collide against each other, and this sort of human drama that's shot on a very epic and yet intimate scale, right? Because we can go into the intricacies of the plot and the whole thing about buying the land versus trying to take over the land, and Morton and what his deal is with buying off Frank's men, and the turning of the allegiances, and how Jill is captured and yet she tries to get out of her situation, and then she's forced into the auction, but then it turns into her favor ultimately. There are of course intricacies and complexities that make the plot very layered and quite potentially subject of rich conversation as to exactly what's going on here at what time, etc. So I mentioned it's a kind of simple plot, but in fact it's presented in a way that provides a lot of potential complexities in terms of a reading of the plot. So there is that. But at the same time, the plot seems almost secondary to the staging of these scenes and the way in which these characters are shown seeing, looking, giving off voltage, showing their muscle, showing their might, giving attitude. And also, this is all encompassed in this thing that we call living or existing. And that's, I think that's such an amazing thing to think about, that Sergio Leone's film, and in particular this film, it's about the plot, it's about the McBain, Sweetwater, it's about Jill coming in, it's about Frank working with Morton, and then Morton double-crossing Frank, it's about Harmonica and his quest for vengeance, and then Cheyenne and how that figures in. It's all about all this stuff, of course. But in the end also, it's so simple too, in that it's about the ultimate expression of human drama. You have people standing off against each other, people interacting with each other, people colliding against each other, and they're sort of formed by their appearances and what they represent and how they're represented by sound and music, etc. But also, it's just ultimately it's an expression of two people and their existences as defined by their appearance and their representations against the narrative, and then how their existences essentially stand off against each other and collide against each other. And it's that collision that is the ultimate form of, that's the ultimate expression of human drama, right? Of human drama, if we understand it. How do you explain drama? Well, drama is, in essence, what happens when you have two people colliding. What is the result of that? Whether it's a good collision or a bad collision, right? That's drama in essence, right? So, and here you have such great epic and yet intimate expressions of this kind of drama. Two characters in a room, two characters on a stage, two characters in the middle of nowhere colliding, and what the end result of that is. And in that kind of way, there's a real, almost fundamental essence that seems to be at work in this particular film, in Leone's cinema in general, but I think in this particular film, because it seems like there is a real directness in how that kind of human drama is portrayed. It's portrayed in many different permutations and combinations of character. This character and this character meet and collide, then this character and this character meet and collide, and this character and this character meet and collide, and then four characters meet and collide, 3, 4, and that sort of different set of combinations, of course. But it seems to be like at once the film is a kind of a plot narrative driven film, but it's also a film that can be seen as being not a plot or narrative driven film, but in fact it's just a set of sequences of characters meeting and colliding. And even so, there is a real atmosphere and charm and suspense and real cinematic force of will that is on display here, that is undeniably magnetic, epic, and magnificent, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of others as well. And I've heard comments here in the chat saying that this is maybe underwhelming. Some aspects of the film are annoying, or there's a kind of underwhelming experience to the film for some people. That is fine too. I can understand those criticisms very, very well, and I'm not here to try to convince you otherwise, because I think it's very healthy for a film to receive maybe not so positive reviews all the time, and so I think that's very much legitimate. But I can only speak from my own experience when I say that I can see it once as a kind of Western homage. I can see it as a deconstruction of the myth. I can also see it in terms of this presentation of this plot that seems simple but seems also layered in terms of complexity at the same time. But then I can also see it as fundamental expressions of human drama expressed at a very fundamental base level, and done with such care and craft and genius. That is the art of Sergio Leone as expressed through this wonderful film, Once Upon a Time in the West. So this has been a film that has been with me for a long time, and hopefully it will continue to do so until, up to the point of dying, right? Or to borrow a phrase, to manipulate it slightly from what Harmonica says, right? What does he say? He says only at the point of dying. So I just said up to the point of dying. But anyway, this is Once Upon a Time in the West, and thank you very much for for this live chat, for the opportunity for talking about this film. So let me just go to the chat here and then we will call it a night. Let's see here. All right. Okay, let's see. Shandon Roel says you can't scare Daisuke. He's a horror fan. Let's see. Okay, just skipping around here. Solitaire Ronan, thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice rest of your day, my friend. Let's see here. Yeah, Antonia Sapienza says the Italian version is minus the harmonica rising scene, which was later included at the insistence of Paramount in the US. But yes, I was mentioning that at the start of the live chat, but thank you very much for reminding me. You know, I've never seen the version of the film that is without the harmonica rising scene. And so I've always wanted to have a Blu-ray release, a deluxe Blu-ray release that would have a version of the film that is without the harmonica rising scene. And so, and I was suggesting at the start of the live chat that to watch the film without that harmonica rising scene, I think would add more mystery and would make his appearance later in the film to be more surprising. And also it would lend itself, the film, to reading the harmonica character as being like a ghost or someone who is like a representation of the spirits of the dead and all the victims of Frank or something like that. And so I would think it'd be such a fascinating thing to watch this film without that particular scene. It would add a different dimension to the harmonica character. So there's that. And yes, it is interesting, right, because my understanding, if my understanding is correct, is that at the very outset in the late 60s, when this was released in different territories around the world, ultimately what ended up happening, if this is true, right, the so-called international cut was different from the U.S. cut, in that the U.S., or not the U.S. cut, but the film was released in the U.S., but then it underwent further cuts, such that it was condensed to a shorter, I think 145-minute version that actually excised a lot of scenes as well. I haven't seen this version, by the way, so I always wanted to see, that's why I'd always want a deluxe Blu-ray that had this shorter cut to see exactly how it worked. You know, if what I'm reading is correct, they actually took out the whole scene of Cheyenne dying, which doesn't make sense at all to me. And also, you edited down heavily the scene where Frank goes and sees Morton's train after the whole gunfight. And according to Alex Cox on the commentary track, the shots of Henry Fonda looking inside the train carriage were excised for that cut, if my understanding is correct. But the U.S. cut, as condensed as it was at that time, I understand, included the harmonica rising shot. So, right, and you're right. And the story is that and if this is true, right, the story is that this was because people, the studios thought that people wouldn't understand how harmonica could appear later in the film if he was seen shot without him seen getting up. So. It's an interesting little bit of editing history, and it's just another example of how complicated I think this whole release history of this film is. Very, very complicated stuff, which I think means that one of these days we must insist on getting a Blu-ray, not a Blu-ray, but any kind of physical media release or something, or a documentary at least that goes into all of the various versions. And at the very least, we always must keep in mind, we always must keep in mind what the running time of the particular version we are watching is, what the specific version is, and if we can get information as to what version we're watching, down to the very details as to when it was screened initially, at what time of the, when exactly it was screened, where it was screened, and what were the circumstances of this particular edit, etc. Who made those editing choices, etc. So these sorts of things are very important, because, as you know, and you obviously know based on the content of your comment, is that there are many cuts of this film that were shown, apparently. And so to try to get a handle as to what exactly is out there is still very difficult, and it's quite a difficult process. So it would be great to have one comprehensive release one of these days. But and I'd love to see a version, and I mentioned this before. Not only I'd love to see a version where there's no harmonica rising shot. I'd love to see that particular version. I'd also love to see a version, if the scene exists, of the scene where harmonica is beaten up by Keenan Wynn's sheriff and the sheriff's men, and other sort of famed scenes of legend and things like that. And I mentioned this before, you know, if you want to get a sense of that particular scene, you can, this particular Blu-ray, there are some issues, there are a lot of issues with the Blu-ray, but one of the things that's good about it, which is a carryover, I think, from an earlier release, which is that it has the photo gallery section. And in the middle of the photo gallery section, you actually get some stills and photos of, not stills, but photos of that particular scene that I'm talking about, of Charles Bronson getting beaten up by those men, which then explains later when we see him at the sort of outpost, the Lionel Stander sort of outpost there, or the little stopover. We can actually see moments or in other parts of the film where he's got bruises under his eye, which is down to the fact that there was a scene that was planned of him getting beaten up, but it didn't end up in the final cuts of the film. So, but it would be great if something like that could be done. I don't know if it exists or anything like that, but if it did exist, it would be great to have a fuller, complete set. Which is why I, as I said before, I don't like the way that this Blu-ray describes this as being a theatrical version and a release and a restored and theatrical version, but it doesn't give us any further detail as to what theatrical version it is, what theatrical release are they referring to? Is it the 1984 re-release, or I don't know. So these details are very vague, and so if ever there's going to be a proper Blu-ray release of this, there should be as many versions as possible, and the versions must be detailed. You must give us exactly the proper details. What is this release? What are the circumstances of the cuts? When it was released? Where it was released, etc., etc. Who authorized this release? Is this Sergio Leone authorized? Wasn't it? Etc., etc. Something similar like this happens with a film like George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead. So I can imagine that a similar kind of release could be possible with a film like Once Upon a Time in the West. I hope it could happen. And I don't know if it's going to happen. It probably won't, but I hope it does, because as you suggest, there are actually different versions out there. Depending on the version that you watch, one's impression of this film can change potentially quite drastically. So, and that's the example that you bring about harmonica rising. That is, I think, the most famous of these changes. So anyway, Antonio, thank you very much for that. Let's see. All right. Yeah, Damnful Ideas Crusader says, as with all Leone, there are multiple editions out there with differences. He was said to prefer leaving out the rising scene, but Paramount insisted on it for the US version. I like how you said he was said to prefer leaving out this, because actually I've heard this as well, but I'm not even sure if that's true or not. We can talk about this later. I mean, it could be true, but I'm not so sure actually, but I can understand the thinking behind, let me just put it that way. I can understand the thinking behind not having it included, and I can also understand if Sergio Leone would have shared that kind of thinking based on the types of filmmaker he was, based on the types of films he was making at the time. Let me put it that way. So, yeah, all right. Let's see. Yes. Okay. Yeah, damn fool. This is Crusader talks also about the only issues for me are the end credits having the wrong end title music. Yes, and by placing Cheyenne's theme and that there's no restoration on the mono mix is the same for the track on the Laserdisc. Yes, you're absolutely right. I agree with you. The end credits music is better, and it's not as good as it could be in these releases. So I wish they could make that change. I also wish they could make a much longer, like, what is it, Redux, something similar to what they might have. I mean, they've done this with Apocalypse Now. They've done it with the Criterion release of the Tree of Life. Something that, in other words, something that wasn't necessarily, well, it was for Apocalypse Now, I suppose. But for instance, the Tree of Life from Criterion, they actually made a longer version that wasn't necessarily it wasn't really a director's cut per se, but it was actually a new version of the film that was made for the Criterion release. And so I can imagine they could make a new version, a longer, complete version of Once Upon a Time in the West one day, or as as I said, quoting harmonica, someday maybe it will happen someday, but oh well. All right, so let's see here. Okay. Yeah, William Newcomer says, I'm entering late, so you may have touched on this, but the opening credits are unreal. Yes, I agree. And Scalder22 says, Blu-ray includes the 1984 restored English language theatrical version and the 2011 restored version. Yes, this is, I mentioned this at the start of the live chat, but yes, that's my assumption. Again, and I always have to be very, very careful. But at the start of the live chat, I said that my assumption is that this particular Blu-ray where it says theatrical, this is referring to the extended U.S. cut that was then released in the early 1980s. So that's why it seems to be corresponding, therefore, with the international cut, except for the fact that it includes the scene of harmonica rising. So, but again, there are all these variables that go into it, and it would have been nice. Just mention again, it would have been nice, therefore, to have the back of the Blu-ray explain that in the similar way that you explained it, Scalder22. Just say it was the 1984, whatever it is, extended cut or restored, whatever the word is appropriate for it, instead of just saying theatrical, because I don't think that I think that word alone is a little bit misleading. But I wish they had used the way that you described it, Scalder22. I think it would have been much better. They should call you and ask you for your descriptions for the next Blu-ray release of this, and I think everyone would be better off. I think really well said. Let's see here. Okay, so I am done. I am done here because it's almost 2 a.m. here, so I have to go and I'm about to fall asleep. So, my friends, thank you very much for your time and energy. And I'm about to leave, of course, but the conversations about this film can continue. So hopefully you can, if you want to continue the conversations among yourselves, please feel free to do so. I will. You can talk up here. This video will be uploaded, and you can have the comment section here as well. Many people here in the live chat also they have their own YouTube channels as well. So if you want to talk about this film on your own YouTube channel and then continue the conversations there, please feel free to do so. I think that's really great. I admit that my conversations are always very limited based on my own personal approach or viewpoint, and also just based on my own limited knowledge and also time. So, and I can't talk about absolutely everything, so it's just impossible for me. But the conversations, if they can continue on elsewhere, please, I encourage that very much. And so, if you want to talk about this on your own YouTube channel, if you want to talk about it in another form or something like that, please do. You can certainly continue on the comment section here on this channel if you want. So, but this has been really fun for me. Thank you very much for letting me indulge myself in this conversation, and I hope one day to be able to, yeah, maybe we can talk more about Leone in the future. Again, that's the other thing about this thing with YouTube and live streams and videos, is that for every one film that I talk about, I realize that there are 1,000 films that I'm not talking about, and so I can only do so much. I wish I had more time in the day to talk about everything I wanted to talk about, but one of these days I will get to everything. But I will certainly do my best. But thank you very much, at least anyway, for letting me talk about this particular film today. It was certainly a lot of fun, and I look forward to our continuing conversations in the future. And so with that, my friends, thank you very much. Stay safe, be well. This is very, very important indeed. Please take good care of yourselves. I can't stress this enough. It's so important to be well, stay healthy. And I mean this in terms of physical health, and I also mean it in terms of mental health and emotional health. Please continue to just take very, very good care of yourselves. Don't, if you feel stressed, or if you feel overworked, or if there are other circumstances that make you feel down or something like that, don't worry. Just take things easy, or as easy as possible. Just be well, or be as well as can be. And all this stuff that's happening in the world, we will beat this, right? We will win. We will beat this thing. So let us do so together, my friends. And so, just once again, really, just take good care of yourselves, because that is the most important thing. The most important thing is your well-being. And once you've taken care of that, my friends, as always, continue to watch a lot of great movies. Let's just continue to do this together, my friends. I always have a lot of fun talking with you. And so I look forward to our further conversations in the future. Thank you very much, and cheers. All right, so that was not bad. It was about 3 hours. I mention this every time, but I always love to do so because I'm a big admirer of our dear friend, Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. I suppose if for one, it gives me the opportunity to say his name again. So I'll say it again: Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. I just love saying that name, Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader. And his channel is great because he goes through these marathon length live streams. So as I said, I couldn't do it again, my friend. What did I do? I clocked in about 3 hours, 3 hours today. So not your levels yet, but one of these days I will build up my stamina so I can reach levels. What is 5, 6 hours? I don't know. What is the longest live stream you've done, Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader? Is it 6 hours, perhaps? I'm not sure. But in any event, my friend, um, one of these days I'll have to match. I'll try to match your live stream running time, but I know that I will fail every time because I can't catch up with your brilliance. So it's always fun to talk with you, my friend. So and one of these days I do want to talk about um, on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So 550. Okay, okay, 550. Is there any reason why you didn't go to the full 6? I wonder. So maybe it was time. I don't know. Maybe it was battery life. I'm not sure. But in any event, my friend. Yes, many channels that I love. Just I can't name them all, but just to name just a few. You know. It, Solitary Ronin Films is here, and Damn Full Idealistic Crusader is here. Kubrick 1972 is here. Our new fan, Marvel Fan 45, has just started a channel, which is great. Jared Wignall, he has a great channel. Just great stuff, great stuff. So many channels, so many to mention. I just can't mention them all. It's just great stuff. I'm so inspired and thrilled by all the activity here. So thank you so much for that. And let's just continue to do what it is we do, my friends. And once again, let's beat this thing. And we can win. All right. That's it. I'm done. Thank you. I'm about to go to sleep. And oh, yes, I should mention, gosh, what am I doing? Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. So next week is Howard's End. So next week is Howard's End. And so same time, same place. It's going to be the Merchant Ivory film. According to the back of this disc, it's 1992, and I'll try. Well, I don't know if I'll be able to make a video about this beforehand, but I will try to talk about this film. It's probably not going to be an in-depth discussion of the film and the novel, the M. Forster novel. It's one of the novels that I return to quite often. I think I read it. I read it very often, in fact, even now, and so I find the story to be so quite intriguing on many levels. Only connect, and the film is equally intriguing and fascinating for me, and so it'll be a great honor to be able to try to talk a little bit about this film next week, Howard's End. So if you're interested, you can stop by and join the chat about Howard's End, and we can go from there. And then yeah, so that's it. So thank you very much, and cheers again. Thank you. Bye. Is this off? No. Right. This is still on, right?